The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon. We'd like to welcome everyone to the 1:30 p.m. meeting of March 1st of the Local Government Commission. I'll ask the Secretary to call the roll.
Okay. Secretary Marshall, here. Auditor Wood.
She'll be calling in. She's gonna call in.
Okay. Auditor Wood, are you on yet? Secretary Penny?
Here.
Getting signal. We'll come back. Mr. Burns is here in person. Mr. Butler
Here.
is here in person. Ms. Harvey is absent. Ms. Hoffman?
Here.
Virgil, and Mr. Philbeck?
Here.
Is Secretary Penny on?
Did you hear me?
Yes, thank you. And Auditor Wood? Not yet. And Treasurer Falwell?
Here.
Here in person.
Thank you, Cindy, and now staff.
So, Darren Edmondson is here in person. Jennifer Wimmer is here in person. Susan McCullough? Here in person. Lewis Andrews here in person. Debbie Tomasco at the board in person. And I am Cindy Aiken, council. I'm here. That's it.
Thank you. If you'll stand and join for our Pledge of Allegiance, and Secretary Marshall will lead us in our salute to the flag. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I salute the flag of North Carolina and pledge to the Old North saying, love, loyalty, and faith.
Thanks, Secretary Marshall. Secretary Marshall is going to adjourn our meeting at the end in honor of a lot of things that are on our hearts these days regarding Ukraine. So we're sorry that she's having to do that, but we look forward to her remarks. I will also tell you that this agency has been virtually open since April of 2020. Through the whole pandemic, we have done that with exercising the highest levels of common courtesy and common sense. And because of other proclamations regarding masks, I put out a memo yesterday that talks about that masks are optional, that people should do what they feel comfortable doing, and that anyone who wears a mask or doesn't wear a mask shouldn't be treated one way or another. It's their choice. And so I wanted people in the audience who are or who are not wearing masks to feel welcome. We got a lot of serious things going on in our country right now, and politicizing masks and vaccines are just not something I have much energy for in my life. So thank you for understanding that. With that, we have a conflict of interest statement. Members, you've had an opportunity to review the enclosed agenda. Does anyone present have an actual conflict or potential or an appearance of a conflict of interest regarding matters there?
Treasurer?
Yes, ma'am.
I may have an appearance of a conflict. Almost everyone from Harnett County knows Lonnie Small and or his son-in-law, Gil Bass, who are the sellers, or Mr. Small's deceased, but would be the parties who own the pier involved in the Holden Beach issue. But I have no association, haven't seen anybody from that family in a long time. Everybody in Harnett County knows who they are, their connection to Holden Beach.
I'm not an attorney. I would just say so noted.
Mr. Treasurer, the auditor is with us now.
Good afternoon, Madam Auditor. Hearing no others, I'll now entertain a motion to approve the meeting minutes and in compliance with protocol that has all 8 state agencies have supposed to have been exercising for the last 18 months. Without objection, We'll consider any motion or a second to that motion to be considered a yes vote for roll call purposes. Okay, hearing none, do I hear a motion to approve the meeting minutes of February 1st?
Permission. This is Cindy Aiken. I wanted to just clarify that the minutes are the second version that I sent, and that was sent a package with the addition from Mr. Butler. Just wanted to make sure everybody saw that.
All right. Do I hear a motion?
So moved, Burns.
Thank you. Second. Do I hear a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Okay, hearing none, the clerk will call the roll.
That was Burns, and I heard Mr. Philbeck, I believe.
Right.
Auditor Wood.
Aye.
Thank you. Secretary Marshall. Aye. Thank you. Secretary Penny.
Aye.
Thank you. Mr. Butler. Ms. Hoffman.
Aye.
Thank you. Treasurer Folwell.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you. We're now on item 10 to share to pass the presentation over to Sharon, to talk about some FIC items. For those that might be joining us by phone, who are a little bit tiring of acronyms, be sure to tell them what FIC means.
Thank you. So these are the first 5 items on your agenda. These are the units that have financial performance indicators of concern that we need to review. Just a reminder, these are the items that took the place of the unit letters that we'd issued in previous years. So the first item is the town of Pergal. They have a financing agreement to renovate a building. The loan request is for $1.5 million with an interest rate of 2.68% and a 20-year term. They have an FPIC, which I will turn the meeting now to Susan for her explanation of that and the town's response.
ODC members, I'm speaking from attachment A that was in your packet. Performance indicators of concern and the response letters. And I'm looking at the memo that is in front at the very beginning of that packet. The first item on page 2 is town of Pergal. They had 2 financial performance indicators of concern in their 2021 report. They reported an operating net loss in their water and sewer fund of $279,878. That was a significant decrease from the prior fiscal year. They also had a tax, their tax revenue, their property tax revenue was 9% less than the budgeted amount, meaning they did not receive 9% of the property taxes that they anticipated receiving from Pender County, who does their tax collection. There's a summary of the response in your memo. The town actually provided 2 responses, one dated February 8th, and then an additional one dated February 15th. In the second response, they talked about several one-time items that impacted their water and sewer fund and caused the operating net loss. They had system development revenues that dropped significantly in 2021, and that was because the prior year, 2020, was the last year of a development. So once the development moved to the next phase, they didn't have those. Also, maintenance and engineering costs incurred were an additional $240,000 in that year. So those 2 things together caused the one-time loss. And then they also did raise rates by 10 or 12%, 10 and 12% for water and sewer rates, respectively. Concerning their property tax shortfall of 9%, I mentioned that Pender County collects the town's taxes. Pender County had a problem with a system conversion during 2021. The town did not receive their property tax deposits timely. They didn't realize this until they got a year-end tax recon from the county in October or November of 2021. So they were not able to disclose those. That was outside of the modified accrual window. That's the county thing. So the town's response was, you have it attached in your document, and it was satisfactory, and we.
All right, we also have with us today in person James Gant, the town manager, and the finance officer right here in front of me. If anybody has questions for them.
Mr. Harris, Mr. Burns, excuse me.
One quick question. Did the town receive from Pender County the payments that were not forwarded in 2021? Did you get them in 2022?
Yes, we did.
Okay. Thanks.
Any other questions from board members? Those are on the phone or in person? Is there any question we hope we weren't asked you?
We're good.
Good answer. Funny to see people's reaction when you say that. Anyway, welcome. You want to take these individually? With that, staff's recommendation is to approve. Okay. With that, do I hear a motion to approve the financing agreement for Burgaw?
So moved.
I'll second it.
Thank you. Motion second being made. Any further discussion? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
For those who were listening online, that was Secretary Marshall, motion, Butler, second. Auditor Wood.
Aye.
Thank you. Secretary Penny.
Aye.
Thank you. Mr. Burns.
Aye.
Ms. Hoffman.
Aye.
Thank you. Mr. Philbeck.
Aye.
Thank you. Treasurer Falwell.
And we have their names for the record.
Yes, sir.
And you're the city manager?
Finance officer.
Okay. Thank you for coming. Appreciate it. Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
All right. Our next is Lake Lure.
The town of Lake Lure is requesting approval of a state revolving loan for wastewater of $12 million. Interest rate not to exceed 4%, a term of 20 years. This is to begin their project to replace essentially their entire wastewater system. And this first part will construct over 15,000 linear feet of lines and equipment for their system. They also had FPIC, which Susan will review, and we have Carol Pritchett, the mayor, and Sam Carr, the finance officer, available virtually.
The town of Lake Lure had two financial performance indicators of concern in their 2021 report. The first one related to their electric fund. It had a quick ratio of 0.0. And a quick ratio should be 1 or greater. The other indicator, their auditor noted a material or weakness or significant deficiency finding in their report. So their quick ratio was in their electric fund, and it was due to their aging dam. They've had to lower the lake to replace part of a sanitary sewer system and are not currently sending water through the generators, so they're not generating revenue. Once they restore the water level in the lake, they should begin generating power again and should restore the fund to fiscal health. The two findings were related to a segregation of duties and a significant audit adjustments finding. For both of these, the town had exactly the same response. The town's council has added a position of an assistant finance director to improve the internal controls and segregation of duties situation. The audit adjustments were related to a grant receivable and a revenue that was incorrectly reported. The additional finance position should reduce the likelihood of future reporting errors. The town's response is attached along with their FPIC report, and it was satisfactory.
And staff's recommendation is to, Mayor Carr or Mayor Pritchett?
Mayor Pritchett.
Mayor, welcome, and I guess it's Mrs. Pritchett. Pritchett. Okay. Do you have anything to add to staff's comments?
Mr. Carr is with us as well. He's the finance officer.
Yes.
Do you have anything to add to staff's comments?
Hello?
We're
Hello?
here, we can hear you.
Okay, I'm sorry. Yeah, I just, if I could explain the hydroelectric fund real quick, I promise I'll be real quick about it, if that would be helpful.
Well, don't jeopardize your application approval. Go ahead.
Okay, I will do my best. The hydroelectric fund, it consists of two generators that were built in 1925 that generates electricity that the town sells to Duke Energy. This is usually under a 10-year contract of fixed rates, and I believe we're in year 8 of that contract. Basically, the town needs water to generate electricity. Of those two generators, there's a large generator that's used for floods and emergencies. It's just basically we use it to quickly lower the lake if we need to. The small generator is what we prefer. It kind of adjusts the lake levels. We can get it within an inch, and we use the small generator all the time. About 4 years ago, the generator, the small generator went down, and because of the age of the generator, everything has to be retrofitted and custom. And it took us about 3.5 years to finally get that generator back online. Also, it was almost $1 million in repairs to that generator. In addition, which kind of is associated with the sewer loan, is that when they built the lake in 1925, they knew where the shoreline was, and they built approximately 60 manholes around the lake, and these laterals run on the bottom of the lake toward the dam where the wastewater treatment plant is behind the dam. It was an elegant design back in 1925, but the theory is if there's cracks, we'll get water, lake water into our system, and the wastewater treatment plant becomes kind of like a water treatment plant. The state has fined us. What we had done is we lowered the lake to work on these manholes, and once we lowered the lake, we couldn't generate. So the manholes were all refurbished, but the lake was down for about 6 months last year. And
Okay, I think that's good.
okay.
Good.
Mr. Treasurer, I just want to, Mr. Ford, the Assistant Finance Director, I just want to recognize his attendance as well. He's with us as well.
Thank you. I think half of the audience heard what you said. The other half was just thinking about Patrick Swayze. So I don't know where we went with all that. But Anyway, thank you. And so we have a motion on the table in a second. Further discussion. Just let me mention both for Burgal and Lake Lure, especially with some of the federal assistance coming in, that Burgal, I'm sure they're pleased to hear, has no funded OPEB healthcare obligation as far as liability on their city. About 1.5 million of teasers and LEO unfunded pension liability, and Lake Lure has $2.5 million of unfunded healthcare liability and about 1.2 million of pension liabilities. So I mentioned these to you because sometimes we get in the consent agenda, we don't get to all this, but just to always keep in mind as stewards of the public money, as you, in some respects, won the lottery with some of the money that's coming in from the federal government, that socking some of that away for this, for the future obligations looks very favorably. The rating agencies look very favorably on that. So I guess we have a motion in a second.
Yeah.
Okay. So I have a motion to accept Lake Lure.
Move approval.
Thank you. Mr. Burns moves approval. Here a second.
I'll second it. Second.
Second is Mr. Butler. Motion and second being made. Any further discussion? Hearing none, the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Wood?
Aye.
Thank you. Secretary Marshall? Aye. Secretary Penny?
Aye.
Thank you. Ms. Hoffman?
Aye.
Thank you. Mr. Philbeck?
Aye.
Treasurer Polo?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor and Finance Officer and Assistant Finance Officer. Congratulations. Now we'll go to another lovely place, North Topsail Beach.
All right, North Topsail is asking for approval of $9.4 million private placement to refund the special obligation bond that it had taken out from USDA for a 30-year term. The interest rate will be an effective interest cost of 2.68%. And USDA has signed off on the payoff amount. And again, this will reduce their interest costs and free up some reserve funds that North Topsail had been required to keep under the requirements of the USDA. We have Caitlin Elliott, the finance officer, and Alice Darian, the town manager, available on the phone. And I will turn it over to Susan to go over their FPIC comments.
Okay, thank you, Sharon. You may remember that the town was on the agenda last month for some special obligation bonds. So this is the same FPIC that you saw last month. They had a significant deficiency in that the town over budgeted amounts in the general and shoreline protection funds budget for June 30th, 2021. And that which is a statutory violation and a financial performance indicator concern. And the town's response is also attached for you to review. They had some changes in a key leadership position, and because of that, an influx of related work allowed the finance officer to overlook some required budget amendments. The town does have a process in place for taking budget amendments to the governing board when obligations arise that exceed approved ordinance amounts. We confirmed that this process takes place prior to entering commitments. This is not a repeat finding and is not expected to recur. So the town's response is satisfactory.
Staff's recommendation is to approve.
Yes.
Okay, Alderman Wood makes a motion to approve. Second.
Second.
Thank you, Secretary Marshall. Any further discussion? Okay, now the clerk will call the roll.
That's, motion Wood, second Marshall. Secretary Penny,
Aye.
thank you. Mr. Burns,
Aye.
Butler, Hoffman,
Aye.
thank you. Mr. Philbeck,
Aye.
thank you. Treasurer Falwell.
Aye. Thank you. And Topsail Beach, like Burgall, has no unfunded healthcare liability for their public service workers. But about 1.2 million of unfunded LEO and teasers, Elders pension liabilities. So from Topsail, thank you for joining us, and thank you for coming in front of the Local Government Commission. Oakboro.
All right, next we have the town of Oakboro. They're asking for approval of $3 million installment contract private placement with their bank. Approval interest rate is 1.66%, and the term is for 10 years. The purpose of the loan is to put in a new sewer pump station, and some force main and gravity sewer lines. They will not need a rate increase to cover the debt service out of the water sewer fund, and staff is recommending approval. And I'm sorry, Doug Burgess, the town administrator, is on the phone, and I'll turn it over to Susan for the FPIC comments.
Susan?
Okay, the town of Oakboro had one fund balance, or one fund financial performance indicator concerned. They reported a fund balance available of 30.58% at June 30. That was 50% of their, less than 50% of their peers who have comparably sized general fund budgets. The similar units report a fund balance of 63% and an average of 34%. So the town again was at 30.58%. Just as concerning was that the town's fund balance had declined from 51.83% at June 30, 2019 to 45% at June 30, 2020 to 30.58%. So we're seeing a trend that we were concerned about. The town's response is attached. It was satisfactory. The town had been funding over the past 10 years a multi-phased town park, which they've now completed. And the expenditures had been partially reimbursed by a grant, but most of it was covered by the town, it appeared. They anticipate, because of some additional businesses in town and some additional housing stock, that they will see a return to a healthy fund balance no later than fiscal year end 2023. And their response was satisfactory.
Okay. Staff's recommendation is to approve. Do I hear a motion or a second?
Chairman,
Yes, sir.
I have a question on the location of Charlotte Pipe Foundry. Were they given any tax exemptions where they don't have to pay their property taxes to locate there?
That's a question for the community to answer.
Mr. Burgess, did you hear the question?
He's on.
Mr. Burgess,
Yes.
did you hear the question?
I did. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir, clearly.
Okay. Yes. Charlotte Pipe was given an incentive. It's a $450 million plant. They have a 80% incentive for 20 years, but still the net tax, as I indicated, is like $250,000 a year. Also, they're a large water user and sewer user. So my indication on the application is that we'll net almost $1 million in revenue from the water and sewer above all costs. So we look good going forward.
Sir, did I understand you say you're going to rebate 80% of the property taxes for 20 years?
That's correct. That's Stanley County and the town of Oakboro agreed to that.
Is there a lock-in on the number of jobs that's got to be created?
Yes, sir. There's 325 new jobs with a payroll of around $60,000 to $80,000 per individual.
And who's going to certify the job count?
I'm sorry, the state is, and I've forgotten the department. Economic development, I think, is looking after it.
Commerce certifies that if it's one of the grants, Commerce will certify that every year.
Yes, it is, and it is a grant.
They have to renew the grant. It renews the grant.
Further questions? Did I hear a motion a second?
So moved. Nancy Hoffman.
Thank you. Are you commissioners or city councilmen or aldermen? Ms. Hoffman,
I'm sorry.
what do they call your councilwoman in councilwoman? That's what they call it in Greensboro, right?
That's fine.
Well, I lived under Board of Aldermen in Winston for 50 years, so that's,
Right.
okay. Thank you all. A motion to hear second?
Second. Burns.
Thank you, Mr. Burns. Motion second being made. Any further discussion? Hearing none, the clerk will call the roll.
Auditor Wood,
Aye.
Secretary Marshall. Aye. Secretary Penny.
Aye.
Thank you. Mr. Butler.
Aye.
Thank you. Bill Beck.
Aye.
Thank you. Treasurer Falwell.
Aye. Bert, thank you for joining us, and I think I heard you say net that you expect to work an additional $250,000 of revenue off of this transaction, and your unfunded healthcare liability is zero. That's great news. And your unfunded teasers and LEO liability is about $600,000. So you defease all that in a couple of years with that extra profit. So just something for you to think about. And
Thank
with
you.
that, we'll go to the last one, Union County.
Right, Union County is asking for a variety of projects, including school spending, community college, capital outlay, library, parks and recs, public buildings, and law enforcement facilities. They do not anticipate a tax increase to pay for these bonds. They are expected to get a triple AAA rating on this issue, and the competitive sale is currently scheduled for March 22nd, so later on this month. They did have an FPIC, which I'll let Susan go over, and Beverly Lyles, the finance officer, is on the phone if you have a question.
Okay, Union County had two FDICs in their 2021 report. The first one, they had a statutory violation that they needed to address. They reported a deficit of $1.6 million in the health benefit fund at June 30, 2021. They use this fund to account for their employee health benefits. Under the North Carolina general statutes, they're required to fund the full amount of any deficit in the next year's budget, and they did not do that. They also had several significant deficiencies that were related to various DSS programs. The county's complete response is attached, along with a fund balance policy that they adopted for the health benefits fund as part of their remedy. They transferred $500,000 to the fund during 2022. In May of 2021, the county adopted their fund balance policy that requires a 20% fund balance reserve at the end of fiscal years beginning 2022. So they are planning on utilizing some of their ARPA funds to offset medical claims that were completely due to COVID. And they're also more deliberately monitoring their claims at year end to make sure that they don't overspend, that they have a chance to react to those budget changes. Concerning the program-related changes, findings, the county has increased the training that they provide to their DSS staff for these programs, and along with the number of reviews of documentation that are conducted by quality assurance staff. They have vacancies that they're working to fill and are reviewing updating policies. Their responses to these FPICs were satisfactory.
Staff recommendations to approve.
Yes.
Do I hear a motion?
I have a question, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Who is the health plan with in Union County? Susan, do you know who the health plan is?
For the health, you mean
Union County,
the health provider?
the health provider, the insurance company.
No, well,
Beverly.
they're going to be
Lyle's on the line.
Beverly Lyles. I think from the way it's set up, they're self-insured, and they just
Yes,
have a funded. Is that correct, Beverly?
Yes, that is correct. Union County is a self-insured insurance program for our health, dental, and vision for all of our employee benefits. Our third-party administrator is Maestro Health that assists with the administration of our program.
Or follow up, call out, share with them what their liabilities are.
And we are talking about the thing that was launched about 15 years ago called the Union County Project. Is that part of this? Where they were
I'm
trying
not
to,
familiar with being called the Union County Project.
where there was an emphasis on primary care for public workers. So, okay. All right. Yes. Union County, as you're aware, you have $100 million worth of unfunded healthcare liability. But to your credit, probably one of the highest in the state, you have $58 million worth of funding toward that. So you're 58% funded. So I congratulate you and your present and previous and hopefully future boards to continue to put a focus on this issue. And I presume that you no longer offer long-term lifetime health care for retirees.
That is correct. That changed in 2013, so that is no longer available for new hires.
Okay, thank you so much. All right.
Thank you.
Do I hear a motion?
I'll make the motion,
Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Butler makes a motion. I hear a second.
Second, Hoffman.
Thank you. Motion second being made. Any further discussion? Hearing now, the clerk will call the roll.
Auditor Wood.
Aye.
Thank you. Secretary Marshall. Aye. Secretary Penny.
Aye.
Mr. Burns.
Aye.
Mr. Philbeck.
Aye.
Thank you, Treasurer Fowler.
Aye. We're now to our consent agenda, and that starts with Bessemer City and ends with Orange Water and Sewer District Authority. Does anyone desire to pull anything off the consent agenda and discuss or vote on it separately?
This is Auditor Wood. I would ask that Holden Beach be pulled from the consent agenda and voted on separately.
So moved. Any others? Okay. Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion to accept the consent agenda for Bessemer City down to Orange Water and Sewer Authority, excluding Holden Beach.
State Auditor Wood, so moved.
Okay. Do I hear a second?
Nancy Hoffman.
Thank you, Nancy. Councilwoman. Motion second being made. Any further discussion?
May I ask a question?
Secretary Marshall has the floor.
I just lost Orange Water Authority. That's my problem. Trying to see it. I see it's a digital piece, but okay, I got it. Okay, no problem.
All right. I won't go through all these, but I think the councilwoman might be interested. Guilford County has $309 million worth of unfunded healthcare liability and only $19 million in the bank. So 3 times as much as Union County and only a third of much in the bank for unfunded healthcare liability. And the rest of them are,
Thanks for pointing that out. So I had noted it.
yeah. And I had an opportunity to speak to Chairman Zig in Wake County, but I think we're maybe making some movement toward Wake County starting to address this issue. So it's not just a small county issue, it's a big county issue too. We have a motion and a second on the floor. No further discussion. Clerk will call the roll.
Consent agenda, Wood, Hoffman, excluding Holden Beach. Secretary Marshall. Aye. Secretary Penny.
Aye.
You, Mr. Burns.
Aye.
Mr. Butler. Aye. Mr. Philbeck.
Aye.
And Treasurer Falwell.
Aye. Okay, we'll now consider the Holden Beach. I presume, just out of courtesy of the audience, the rest of the folks are here for something else that's on the agenda. Well, everything else to do this afternoon. So, okay. Thank you. And so we'll now go to Holden Beach.
All right, Holden Beach is asking for approval of $3.3 million installment purchase. This is a taxable deal.
Could someone mute your phone, please? Beautiful.
This is a taxable deal to purchase property and the Holden Beach Pier. The town plans to use the property for much needed regional beach access. They only have access on either end of Holden Beach, not in the middle area. Also for public parking and access for beach nourishment activities. Again, it's a bank placement. The interest rate is 3.18% and the term is 15 years. From the town, we have Mayor Alan Holden, Mayor Pro Tem Rick Smith, and Town Manager David Hewitt with us here in Dogwood.
Two.
I'd like them to come up, Mr. Treasurer.
Yeah, that's Mayor Holden. Yeah. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm Mayor Alan Holden, and we certainly appreciate your giving us time and consideration today.
All right, we'll probably have some questions from the board members, and tell me your name. Sorry.
I'm David Hewitt, Town Manager.
Okay. Hey, Dave.
I'm Rick Smith, Mayor Pro Tem.
Thanks for coming. If we start to get a lot of questions, you may have to come up to the table so that people can make sure they hear you. So, welcome to Raleigh. All right. Staff's recommendation. Approval. Okay. There's been a lot of news about this acquisition, and Alder Wood wanted to have it pulled as a separate item. So with that, I think I'd like to go ahead and start a discussion and then ask for a motion in a second, unless there's some strong opinion about doing it otherwise. Okay. All right. Any discussion about this item?
Treasurer, I do want to point out that attachment B in your materials are copies of the public comments we have received in writing regarding this item.
All right. And what's the gist of that?
Mostly approval.
Why don't you, if you don't mind, pull that middle chair up that's empty, and if y'all come up to the little table there, that'd be lovely.
Most of the emails were in support
Right.
of the transaction. There were a few that were not.
All right. So I guess my knowledge about this is I've seen this pier on property on Holden Beach. It's a fantastic place. I guess some of the things I've read is, can you state publicly what the intention of the city is regarding keeping the pier, maintaining the pier, what the capital expenditures of the pier may be?
I would defer to our town manager.
Okay.
Yes, sir. There's 350 feet of oceanfront property there. It's envisioned as a regional beach public access for not only the reason that Ms. Edmondson mentioned, but also emergency vehicular service to get out on the beach. The pier and the pier house itself is an iconic representation for North Carolinians, one and all, for what it represents to be able to get to the state's ocean waters. The capital investments required to fix the pier, we've seen numerous Facebook feeds regarding save the Holden Beach pier, and also the plan that was put forward in addition to our engineer's report that used words like it's most likely outlived its usefulness. Should it be required to be repaired, it is in-house building inspectors' estimates that those types of fixes are mostly cosmetic, but should there be significant repairs that have to be made, they would be made incrementally over time and stretched out as budget appropriations would permit the town to do. It was about 4 years ago, I believe, when Hurricane Florence came through. The mayor and I were standing about 100 yards west of the pier in the lee of the wind while 25-foot seas kissed the bottom of the pier for a period of about 6 hours. We weren't there for 6 hours, but during that time frame, we have engineers' reports on the condition of the pier. But if those 25-foot seas didn't take it then, it's going to be there for a while.
Okay. I'm not a pier expert, so you've talked about what we can see because of some of the letters we've gotten, and I'm sorry, you're all public servants, so you have to deal with these, whether they're accurate or not accurate, of things that you can't see. Tell me what concerns you.
I can speak to what I know.
Okay.
And what we do know.
You're in the wrong room now. No, just kidding.
About the pier. It's probably not long.
Yeah.
The pier pilings themselves, we did have an inspection done on, had some bad weather, and was not able to complete the underwater portion of the inspection. Those pier pilings, we were not able to ascertain the date of their installations, but those are what are referred to as greenwood pilings. And while there may be charts as to what the longevity of those pilings may be, the life expectancy for them is undetermined at this time. If you go look at them, they look really green, which is an indicator of good health. Now, what they look like when they get down into the substrate of the ocean beach, we don't know. We're going to follow on and have a pending underwater assessment of that portion of the pier scheduled here in the very near future. I think it's going to cost us $16,000. One of the benefits, we actually have an active beach project underway now that is going to extend the high tide mark out about 200 feet. So in some essence, in one aspect, we're actually going to bury many of the pilings that are currently at the high tide mark or or lower. So we're actually going to put probably 8 feet of sand up and around 200 feet worth of the pilings on the pier.
And I'm just spitballing here, but what happens? You said weather has not allowed you to inspect it. So you're asking us to improve it without that inspection, which has been some of the criticism. So the best way is just to irrigate this. Let's just get it out. So what would happen if you did inspect it and realize that you bought a lemon?
Well, it's anticipated that the portion of the pier that may perhaps be a lemon would be seaward of the high tide mark, and that the dry land pier is still viable. I had my granddaughter out on it about 6 weeks ago, and it was in one of those heavy sea days. It wasn't moving very much.
Well, let me try to ask it differently. If you couldn't inspect it because of weather, and you're asking for approval before it is inspected, once you do inspect it, the part that's in the water, in the sea, if you find out that you bought a lemon, what's the contingency plan?
Well, the real estate itself stands for the note. The appraisal is certainly above the ask on the financing amount. So the real estate in and itself is worth the property. As a matter of fact, the appraisal itself doesn't put much value in the pier, if any at all.
Okay. But when you started your remarks about this, you talked about the iconic landmark that this is. If you get out there, up underground, when the weather permits, up under the water, and figure out you bought a lemon, what would lead to it be the pier being uninhabitable or not usable? And who I should know this, I'm the treasurer, but I don't. Who regulates the safety of that?
That would be the town's building inspector that would make that determination. Who most likely ask for an outside engineer assessment of that.
And that person would have expertise in that type of thing.
Yes, sir. Okay. The current building inspector has rendered an opinion as to the suitability of the pier as part of our due diligence process.
Is a restaurant coming with the pier?
The pier building itself comes with the pier too.
And is it anticipated that will be operations still remain operational even under different ownership?
Yes, sir. The idea is to have a vendor operated, hence the taxable nature of the line. The town will not be in the operations aspect of the pier.
And any other questions?
Yeah. What will be the liability now that a municipality owns the pier and 300 and what, say 50 feet of shoreline? Or
the same liability that we have for our other public accesses that we provide to the public at large is covered through our.
Who owns the pier now?
It's a consortium that Mr. Gil Bass is the principal in.
It is a corporation, Holden Beach Fishing Pier, Inc.
And for the record, this is Mayor Holden speaking.
And why do they want to sell it?
He's old and tired like some of the rest of us.
Lost his wife a few years ago, and he's pretty much from that point on, he kind of stepped back. And again, when we did our plan to repay the money for the pier, we did not really include the pier itself. We just included the building. There's also several grants that are available that have repaired some of the other fishing piers in North Carolina and other states. But we can't apply for those until we actually own the pier.
And is the point of contention down there feeling that the town's paying too much for it? Is that what are the issues down there? That's against purchasing the town purchasing the pier.
Well, the Board of Commissioners voted unanimously to pursue the the financing of the pier. The contentious issues range from, they're all over the place, sir. The feedback that y'all have received, as I understand it, is based on concerns of the condition of the pier, whether or not it's actually needed, that much access is actually needed for regional beach access. There are some that don't want a regional beach access there.
Okay. And what about the parking now? I read about the parking. Give me your version of the parking. It's going to go with.
There's about 80 spaces of public parking spaces there now that actually would qualify as off-street parking. And the Board of Commissioners is considering a paid parking program. Matter of fact, they're considering it pretty hard. 3 or 4 of the last months have dialed in pretty tight a paid parking program, on-street and off-street parking. But heretofore, it has not included the pier as part of that paid parking program. Again, since the town doesn't have ownership of it, they can't contemplate that until it takes ownership of it. But it is my understanding and my belief that if the town acquires that property, that the revenue for paid parking at that location would be part and parcel of the revenue used to pay for debt service on it.
Talking about a pea gravel parking lot, sort of.
It's actually asphalted already.
Okay. But you have free parking in other parts of Holden Beach. Is that going to remain free?
The paid parking program at Holden Beach that is being contemplated is a town-wide paid parking program, both on-street and off-street, at the few other off-street locations that qualify as such. So the town's looking at a town-wide paid parking program, but only the spaces that are at the pier, that revenue that would be generated from that location would be used for paying for the pier under the existing legislation that applies for on-street, off-street paid parking.
And does the revenue from that make this perk, or is it perk without that?
It perks without it.
Okay. And is it common knowledge that the town itself is going to go to paid parking?
From the amount of interest and feedback that we've had over the last 3 or 4 months, not only from locals, but from up and down the coast also. Yes, sir.
So that's under the bridge and all that.
Except for the wildlife boat ramp,
right,
which is off limits as far as paid parking goes.
Okay.
What's on our agenda for March the 8th commissioner meeting? And as I said, we've gone through several iterations of it to finally come up with one that the public seems to be happy with. Just
What's the population of Holden Beach now?
What day?
Registered. What's the census show for Holden Beach?
It's right at 600, I believe.
600?
Thereabouts.
And it's
So we're at 2,300 homes there. And a lot of our people are there 6 months, 4 months, 12 months, come and go.
I'm surprised. I thought there'd be more than 600 people that Holden Beach over here as registered voters. Probably less registered voters than that.
Well, your question, sir, was what does the census say? There's a difference between the census and what registered voters.
Yeah,
we don't understand the census hand.
Yes, sir.
Any questions from the audience? I mean, from the board members via Zoom?
Mr. Chairman,
I
may
do.
I get a couple?
Auditor Wood.
I suggest you defer to the auditor. That's what I would do if I were you. Auditor Wood, you have the floor.
can't see any of the gentlemen, so I don't really care who answers, but so the gentleman, I guess, that was speaking about the parking, what you're telling me is that the town was really serious about paid parking before they started talking about the purchase of the pier and the property.
The paid parking issue was actually identified as one of the Board of Commissioners' strategic goals during the budget preparation this time last year, and was articulated as such in their published goals. Matter of fact, it was one of the top 10 goals.
That's not what I asked you. What I asked you was, the conversation was serious about paid parking, beach-wide, citywide, whatever you want to call it. The conversation was serious before the conversation around the purchase of the pier and the property that goes with it.
Yes, ma'am. That's affirmed. As a matter of fact, the Board of Commissioners had established a Citizens Advisory Committee in 2 different forms over the course of the last 2 or 3 years that paid parking has been discussed.
And if you buy this pier, this iconic pier, and you talked about the Save the Pier efforts, or people are wanting to save the pier, and then you run into structural issues and their major cost, are you going to be back here for more money to fix that, or are you going to raise the parking fees to pay for it?
The commissioners are on record as saying no to using any property tax revenue to pay for the pier. And the maintenance that may be required is currently programmed to come from within existing resources. The town will not be back to borrow any more money to fix the pier should it be required, should repairs be required.
When you consider the parking fee a tax?
No, ma'am.
So I asked, would the parking fees, could they be affected because of the damage to the pier that you don't know about yet?
Parking fees.
No, I don't think so. And one of the reasons why is this beach nourishment project that we currently have going. If the number of shell seekers continues to be to increase in the numbers that we've seen, we're going to have to start busing people over. This beach nourishment project is, along with the COVID refugee syndrome that we've seen, where people are abandoning the inner cities and are coming to the beach. We're just seeing hordes of visitors come down to the beach. So our occupancy tax is strong, and will be the primary source for debt payment on the financing instrument.
And given the interest that I've had in this since I guess you would say I'm instrumental in Senate Bill 473, I want to understand that why this real estate deal is going through the mayor's real estate company.
And Mayor, thank you, Alder Wood. Before you answer that, Senate Bill 473 is something that Alder Wood, Senator Barnes, and to some degree us worked on to bring some of the State Ethics Act that applies to statewide officials to local officials. So for those of the audience not familiar with Senate Bill 473, that's what that was. Mayor.
Thank you for the question, because that's one of the issues I wanted to address. My company had the listed properties available to the open market before the town expressed an interest. We advertised and promoted as we do all of our listings. When the town showed an interest, I immediately offered the commission, which is 6 figures on this property. I gave that up in order to reduce the money that the town potentially would pay for the property. And it's been a very hard pill to swallow as the continued opponents put me through the newspapers and the radio stations, the TV stations, pointing out that I'm a dual agent and I'm going to make all this money. Whenever I've given up 6 figures and pulled myself out of any negotiation or discussions, what more can I do?
You know what? That's not what you've been through is really not the issue for me. I'm asking a simple question. I wanted to know why your real estate company was involved. That's all I wanted to know here today. And then the other piece of it is, at what point did you pull yourself out of, and you're saying as soon as the town showed interest?
I don't have a specific date, but whenever it became an issue, and obviously to the town's advantage and to my advantage personally, to withdraw any discussions, I don't know what else to tell you.
I just simply wanted answers to my questions. That was all.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Mayor
Mr. Chair.
Jim- Thank you, Mayor Alderwood. Mayor, do you have any other thing you want to add?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman.
And then we'll go to Biff.
All right. The question was asked, which I believe was, does the town have experience in regard to maintaining piers? One of the things that was not mentioned, the town has other piers, not on the ocean, but we have piers on the waterway. And we constantly maintain and monitor the condition of those properties. And we've had no lawsuits or accidents, I don't believe, over the years. So we're on top of things in regards to that.
Any other questions from board members? Mayor, has your
I'd like
attorney,
to follow up on the auditor's question.
Secretary Penny? Secretary Penny. Thank you.
She asked, let me ask her question in a little bit broader. What, if any, compensation or remuneration will your firm or anyone associated with your firm receive as a result of this transaction?
I have never directly, indirectly, to my knowledge, received any benefit whatsoever of any kind, nor any employee or associate of any of my companies.
But will any of them receive something?
No one affiliated with me in any way, past, present, or future, will receive any benefit from this transaction.
Thank you.
Mr. Butler?
I just want, Mayor, as your attorney counseled you on this in view of the recent legislation that's been passed?
Yes, sir, I'm aware. And the town attorney as well.
Quick question. You said the vote was unanimous to approve the purchase?
To approve the financing agreement. Yes, sir.
And did you have, I'm sure, I assume, and you can confirm for me, did you have open public meetings about this before that vote took place?
Yes, sir.
And were all of the issues that are related to us in the written materials discussed in those open hearings?
Sir. Yes, sir.
And your commissioners voted unanimously after hearing from their constituents?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Burns.
Mr. Chairman, may I add one more point of clarification?
And then I'll get Biff next. Go ahead.
The Holden Beach Fishing Pier, Inc. has been there since 1959. In the last 2 decades, I have represented their properties exclusively, properties that they rented on the canal, vacant land, and another company had the pier listed before I had it listed. So I was a second company for the fishing pier. But I also still have, in the history in the last year, I sold 2 oceanfront lots adjacent to the property that the town's trying to buy now. Those properties, 2 oceanfront lots, sold for just under $600,000 each. You can do the math compared to what the town's getting this property for potentially is a substantial discount from what I sold to the general public, 2 oceanfront lots next door.
Any other questions from the Zoom? Biff?
I had one quick question.
Stand up and then face it.
I'm sorry. I'm Biff McGilvery. I'm on staff of the commission. I've been peripherally associated with this transaction since its inception. It's on one of the first calls. And it's my understanding that the transaction primarily is for the acquisition of the land. Isn't that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So, all of the land and its potential use is going to be for public purposes, isn't that right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And so you have very incidentally and tangentially a pier associated with it. That's kind of what has generated the tempest in a teapot. But it's my understanding also, and I really had not focused on this, so I'm sorry to bring it up right now, but I'm just curious about it. You've got a taxable loan, and it is all stemming from the private activity associated with the pier. Is that right?
Yes.
There's no other way to do that?
Based on advice of our bond counsel, that was the best. We'll follow the advice of the bond.
Okay, and I respect that. I'm very curious about that. You would pay a taxable loan. It seems like somehow or another, it could have been split a little more inexpensively to have to happen. But if that's the case, that's the case. I just put up.
Thank you, Ben. I think it's important because I have that question written down right here. Why is this taxable? Why is this taxable loan? And
it makes it a taxable activity bond, a private activity bond, and they're attributing, just from my limited recollection and understanding, more than 10% of the value of that property, taxable activity, which would be just that little restaurant apparently, and maybe the receipts from operating the pier. I don't know.
Okay. So a little bit to the north of you, we were able to help New Hanover County sharpen their pencil about a year ago when they were rebuilding their government center, and they were doing a private PPP transaction, and by our staff, Biff and others, helping them sharpen their pencil, they were able to save $21 million on a $123 million project interest. So I know I'm probably stepping my foot where it doesn't belong, but my advice, you can choose to take it or not, is that you take what Biff just said and look at the possibility of splitting this out on the taxable and the non-taxable side so that you can lower the cost of acquisition and lower the cost of capital. And possibly, when you start charging for parking, just start charging for parking for those 80 spots and sort of see how that goes over before you start making the whole town pay for parking. It just may be a way, no pun intended, to kind of stick your toe in the water and to see how your, I'm not going to call them that, but your visitors and your residents really feel about paying for parking. Just focus on the paid parking on those 80 spots to see how that goes over. And you can possibly get the juice to do that by separating out the financing of this transaction to the taxable and the non-taxable portion, which would lower your interest rate. Does that make sense, Biff?
Yeah, in fact, it is, to be quite fair, because rates are so low, the taxability is not going to have such a huge impact on the overall transaction that it makes it appropriate now. It can be approved just as it is, because it's not excessive by any stretch of the imagination due to the fact that the tax is occurring in a low tax rate a low tax structure, interest rate structure, I'm sorry. But they can always come back and modify or restructure the loan with less, with lower rate if they can, and still come in under the approval that's made today.
Do you see any disadvantage to even at least thinking through that strategy? Is there any downside to it, Biff?
No, sir. To be quite fair, no. And to be honest about it, they don't even let me play a bond counsel on TV. I'm not one. But it's just stuff like that just kind of pops right up, if you know what I mean.
Right. Okay. Just a suggestion that if you can reduce your interest cost and maybe as a trial run, do the 80 spots for parking for the 80 spots and just to see how it really works. You could do the whole town and you could you could upset the whole town at once. It's just a way of saying we're charging for these 80 spots. The city just acquired these 80 spots. Part of this transaction is renting these 80 spots. You see, it just kind of flows that way. And the only other reason for making that other suggestion is that a lot of your visitors are long-term residents. They don't understand what we do with the LGC or anything like that, but it's all they want to know is that you've sharpened your pencil as much as possible and looked around the corners and used both sides of the box once you decide which way to go. So anyway, that's my 2 cents. So you've got a great community. I just need to ask one question before I vote on this. Am I supposed to be walking over that bridge?
You can, but it's kind of scary.
I do, but should I? Is it illegal?
It's legal.
It's legal to walk over that bridge. Okay.
Not recommended.
Not recommended. Put a railing on it, which still it. Decide.
You got a railing on it now?
Yeah. Stop looking for rain.
The view is still good.
Yes, sir. Oh, the view's great. So anyway, Cindy.
This is Cindy Aiken, and just in the interest of full transparency and full information, number one, so LGC members know that due diligence is ongoing. And maybe I was lax in not adding it to your packet, but we received information, and when the question about the mayor's real estate firm being involved, so immediately my wires go up and we need to ask the questions. So we received from the mayor a sworn affidavit stating most of what he said this afternoon, plus other things. There were no specific dates on it, however, and I looked at that, but I asked the staff and we sent to the town manager's office last Monday a question, could we please have the town attorney's opinion? That the town attorney was satisfied that this transaction is not violating any ethics laws or any ethics policy or ordinances of the town. And if the attorney was satisfied with the affidavit, did not get another one. So Friday morning, we did get that from the attorney. However, I pressed one more time for any more specific dates. And I thought, well, in case we got something by now, I don't know if the attorney received that or not, but regardless, I just wanted the board to know that the town attorney has opined that the transaction is free of ethics or that the criminal statute 14-234 problems. The second thing I want to say was our trustee Debbie, our monitor over there, said, was it just one? We wanted just to say it for transparency so the person would know. She's receiving some chats commenting on this matter from a person in the public. But again, this is not a public hearing, so there's no requirement to take comments. But we did provide you with the written comments for our policy that came in earlier.
Thank you. And there's nothing that prohibits Debbie from sharing those chats to the local elected officials so that they can deal with these questions in a transparent way. So, okay. Mr. Holden, I appreciate you coming. I know that when the beach is named Holden and you're the mayor of Holden and you own Holden Realty, I know, anyway, I appreciate you coming. I appreciate you signing this affidavit. I appreciate you saying what you said. So, thank you. With that, I'll entertain a motion to approve.
May I ask a question?
Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry. I apologize.
That's okay. If we approve, we would be approving the information that was provided here. Would that prevent them from doing the split if they decide to do that, or should that be what we would be voting on? It's kind of a bond council issue, I think, but.
Are you asking, can we word a motion in such a way that gives them the flexibility to explore what we discussed?
Yes.
Or could it be deferred and give them time to see if we can work out?
I'd be more interested in making a motion that gives them the flexibility to explore what we described.
Would that be, say, up to this amount and any lesser amount would be approved? Is that an appropriate way to do it?
I thought, this is Alder Wood, I thought that's what Biff said, is that we could approve this, and if they decide to split it, it won't be any more. And so I thought we are kind of capping it. If we approve this, they go a different route and split it out, it won't be any more than this. And so I was thinking that we could approve this today, and then if they go a different route, it will probably come under the amount we approved today. Is that what Biff said? That's what I understood Biff to say. Is that not what he said?
Yes, that's correct. Yes.
This is Cindy. I believe that's right. Let me pull up our rules.
It'll sort of be not to exceed.
It's
what
an
we're approving.
amendment. It's not increasing any terms.
Right. Okay. I think we're all on the same page. Okay. While she's looking that up, do I hear a motion to approve?
So moved.
Okay, Secretary Marshall, second.
I'll second.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Burns. Motion second being made. We're approving the application as before us. As is, with the direction to the town to explore some of the things that the board brought up as possible ways to reduce the immediate and long-term cost of this acquisition. All right. Motion second being on the floor. Any further discussion? If not, the clerk will call a roll.
Okay, Marshall Burns, Auditor Wood,
Aye.
Secretary Marshall. Aye. Oh, excuse me, thank you. Secretary Benny,
Aye.
Mr. Butler, Ms. Hoffman,
Aye.
Mr. Philbeck,
Aye.
Treasurer Falwell.
Aye. Okay. Thank you all for coming. And we're use us as a resource, use BIF as a resource, and think outside the box, and whatever we can do to help you sharpen your pencil, we're here to assist, because we know that ultimately it helps the taxpayers there.
Yes, sir. Thank you for the advice.
Mr. Chairman, and as we depart, as part of North Carolina, we make all of us proud. Holden Beach, twice in the last decade, we've been named the #1 family beach in America nationally. So we're all North Carolina.
Thank you. All right. We're now next down to. We're down to number 18.
Next item on the agenda is the unit update. This is attachment C in your packet. Just a quick note, we're going to continue to label the attachments going forward, hoping that it's a little bit easier for y'all to find stuff. And I'll turn it over to Susan for unit updates, and then we've got several items that need have action items on our individual unit.
They're going to put these all together.
All right, and unless anybody has any objections, we'll vote on all action items as one.
Okay, I have unit updates for the 7 of the 8 municipalities that the Commission is managing the finances for at this time. Some of them, most of them do not have, or several of them do not have actions this month. East Laurinburg and Eureka both just have unit summaries. There's no votes needed for items there. So I'm not going to talk about those specific unit summaries. Please look at those. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. I'll be glad to help you any way I can. The first one I'm going to talk about is Cliffside Sanitary District. We have a rate resolution for Cliffside that will be effective in 2 tranches. The first one will be March 1st, and it includes residential customers only. And then on July 1st of 2022, there will be an additional rate increase that will be residential as well as commercial. The per month increase that will be effective in March today is a total of $183 a month. Then the additional increase that is effective in July is $573 a month. And you can see the rate increases by class of customer, residential, or industrial, or institutional in your packet compared to Cliffside. So that's the first item that we'll be voting on.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Has this proposal been discussed within the town? People know it's coming.
I don't know that. That's a good question.
Cliffside has traditionally mirrored their rates with Broad River Water and Sewer Authority, and that has been publicly discussed. And there's no board or staff or anything for Cliffside.
How many residents?
It is 74.
74 connections.
Yeah, it's a very small number.
And anytime we've held public hearings up there, like we're required to do for the budget, we get no attendance.
They don't. They have not attended historically. Yeah, it looks like the residential numbers. That's 81 that will be impacted. 81 people that will be impacted.
Just easier if people know a little bit in advance.
Excuse me?
It's easier when people know a little bit in advance.
It is absolutely easier when they know in advance. Yes.
I'm just going to interject real quick.
Go ahead.
I might be, this is Cindy Aiken, Secretary, I might be mistaken, but I think that, I mean, it's good to do it, but I don't think there's a legal requirement that they get notice of rating. Does that sound right, Sharon? I'm just talking about the politics, if you will. Exactly, the public impact. Yep. Yeah, but as far as any requirement, I think, no. I just forgot something. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm asking the question. Okay. I'll let you know. I'm asking my staff about that. And I'll let you know. to Pikeville. The town of Pikeville has got, moving on to Kingstown. There's 2 items here for Kingstown. Oh, I have an answer for you. They have not yet been notified. It is a minimal but necessary change. They will note it on the next bills so that residents are aware of it. Okay. Concerning Kingstown, there is a grant award approval that we need the commission to approve. This is for a direct grant that the town of Kingstown was awarded for $50,000 in the 2021 through 2023 biennial budget that was adopted by the state of North Carolina on November 18th of 2021. So there's a resolution to receive that. And there is an application that goes along with that, that the commission needs to approve. There's also they're going to use the money in the sewer fund to pay the town of Shelby with some back due receivables for them maintaining the sewer system. And so there's a couple of budget ordinances, one in the general fund where the grant revenues were posted, and another in the sewer fund for $50,000. So you have 2 budget amendments for the town of Kingstown included in your packet. For the town of Hydra, which is the next unit, there is a budget ordinance to recognize an asset and inventory assessment grant that was awarded to the town of Pikeville by DEQ. There's grant revenues that are used to fund engineering fees in the water fund, and then a grant, and then in the sewer fund as well, $150,000 each. So that's for the town of Pikeville. Switching over to page 2 on your unit summary, the town of Robertsonville, that we are also managing, has a budget amendment for a sewer fund. And I apologize, these pages are not numbered. So I know it's hard to move around with it. Hydra has a sewer fund amendment that is recognizing increased sewer usage charges that they have collected this year that are offset with some maintenance operations and maintenance fees. And then finally, Spring Lake. There are 2 adjustments included for Spring Lake. For one related to municipal elections that are required because federal held an election and the state had to hold an election as well. So there was $1,500 of costs associated with that. They're also moving some money around for their budget because they are entering into a contract to do a town manager search for a permanent town manager. And finally, there were some reimbursements from a cost of an accident cleanup that the fire department had. So there was some budget amendments there. Those are all the items that I have I need the commission to vote on for those units. Sharon?
Members, I got double booked and we're gonna call Mr. Burns. We're transitioning our 403B program and got about 58 of our employers across North Carolina government units. I've got to address them for about 2 minutes, so I'll be absent from the meeting. But Sharon's gonna chair. Mr. Burns.
Thank you, Mr. Treasurer. I just wanted to, I've read through it, but are there any of these units that are under our control that are you all staff satisfied with the progress they're making towards their goals right now, or are there some that that require action by us today that you have some concerns about the proposals and the goals that have been set for them?
That's a good question. We are just in the middle of going through the fiscal accountability agreements that we executed with every single one of these units to see what their status is and how they're progressing. We do have several, some that are moving very well. Pikeville is moving very well. We've got some that we're still moving, we're still working with, and we'll continue to. Spring Lake is so new that we haven't yet executed a fiscal accountability agreement with them that we can use as an exit strategy. So they're all at different phases, but we do continue to monitor that so that we can return them to local control as soon as feasible. So.
Okay, any other questions?
And with Cliffside, can I go back to Cliffside?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, with Cliffside, they haven't been notified yet of any changes. They will be, it's my understanding, they will be notified on their bill next, is it March or April? When they will be notified?
It will be in the bill that the rate increase is included in. So they won't get any advance notice, but there will be a notification in their bill that there's an increase in that one. So it'll be in April when they get it, I do believe, based on the timing of it. It's effective today.
Sharon, this is Auditor Wood. I just wanted to clarify, I think what Commissioner Burns was trying to ask, are there any with these agreements that you have concerns about, or is all those with agreements moving along nicely?
Some are not moving quite as fast as we would like, but they are moving, so we will continue to work with them.
Yeah.
And I think the last part of his question, nobody that needs to come before this commission and have any actions taken.
Not at this time, no.
Did I get that right, Commissioner Burns?
Yeah, I think that's pretty close. I wanted to make sure that there was none that we had pending actions on this section of our agenda that you had concerns about that would affect what we needed to know about.
To move forward, yeah.
Yeah.
Regarding Cliffside, Maria Honeycutt, I believe, is on the phone. She is the executive director of Broad River Water and Sewer Authority, and they do the billing for us on behalf of Cliffside. And so she might be able to better answer the questions. And Maria, I apologize for putting you on the spot.
I did not realize she's on the phone. That's good. Okay.
When will the customers be notified of the rate increase for Cliffside?
So the bills for the end of February just are going out today. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So they would go out at the beginning of April, but we could very easily send out a separate mailer to those 84 plus customers to let them know that this is coming. That would not be an issue at all.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, I think that would be a good idea. Yes.
I agree.
Thank you, Maria.
You're welcome.
Just to satisfy myself, I said, I did look at this.
So in sanitary district has their own statutory scheme, and the only time it mentions prior notice for increased rates is, this is 138-64.1, check me on this. Rates applicable solely to the construction of development subject to that plan development statutes, which these are all wrong sites now because they repealed all those and recodified it. But I'm reading this as only if you're increasing rates or service charges applicable solely to development that's happening, and that's not the case here.
Yeah, this is to cover operating costs.
And the statute right before that just flat out says, the board may modify and adjust service charges and rates without it. There's no notice requirement, but I'm not arguing that it's a good idea to do that. But I just wanted to. And we will work with Maria to make sure that those customers get notified. Yes, good. Thank you. Any other questions? All right, do we have a motion for approval of the resolution for Cliffside for the rate revision, the resolution for Kingstown to approve the grant award, and then the budget amendments for Kingstown, Pikeville, Robertsonville, and Spring Lake?
I'm making the assumption that some form of formal or informal notice will be sent to the 80-some customers.
Yes, sir.
Then I move the approval of all of the necessary resolutions.
Second, Nancy Hoffman.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Cindy, would you? Okay. All right. So that was all of those resolutions for Cliffside, Sanitary District, Kingstown, Pikeville, Robertsonville, Spring Lake, Secretary Penny, Councilwoman Hoffman, Auditor Wood.
Aye.
Thank you.
Went blank. Y'all went away if you can hear us.
Audio's gone.
That's strange. Why are we on and they're not?
Right.
Good question.
They're controlling the meeting. At least we thought. Yeah.
Secretary Penny, this is Mike Philbeck. While we have a minute, is there significance to the two pretty little girls behind you in the picture?
No, well, yes. When I was a teacher, I used to take my students to libraries, and a librarian artist. We went right after the Civil War, and a librarian. That's a commentary of that artist on the status of their society, that a little girl who is just coming home from school has to take care of her sister because they literally blew themselves back into the Dark Ages. People were living in what would be modern day caves when we went there. It was, I'll put it this way. Students who were just interested in getting a grade got off the plane and started crying, and still go back there now because they were so moved by the condition and the hope of the people.
It is a profound, it really is profound.
Okay, I heard that our audio is back up, I believe. Our video, I don't believe is back up.
Can you hear us?
Yeah,
We can see you.
All right, let's continue with the vote.
All right, we had an aye from Auditor Wood. So Secretary Marshall, aye. Thank you. Penny with the motion. Mr. Burke.
Aye.
Mr. Butler.
Aye.
Mr. Philbeck.
Thank you, Victoria.
Aye. Aye.
Thank you.
Falwell.
Aye.
Okay.
All right.
Okay. Mr. Treasurer, our next, I think, item is the presentation, which
Right. Okay.
just have a moment to get the
Hang on.
screen.
Well, this is a good chance, since we're at 3:16, which is very biblical. We are going to sing happy birthday to Mr. Philbeck. This is
Oh,
the
my
70th. It's his You're smoking a cigar in an LGC meeting. You deserve a little ridicule. So let's all, Sharon, you lead us. Oh, you serve the pleasure of. Tell someone.
Cindy, you will lead.
All right.
Happy
Birthday to you. Happy birthday.
To you.
Happy birthday, dear Mr. Happy birthday.
Y'all are very nice, but stick to your day jobs.
Madam Auditor, do you shag better than you sing?
It's not gonna go well.
I can answer that. I don't know how long she sings, but she's an excellent shagger.
Oh.
Dancing shoes at the ready.
All right. You didn't answer the question. That's what you always say to people.
I nodded. I said, yes, yes, I shag much, much better.
Then you sing. Okay.
Yes. But that's not saying much because I can't sing.
Noted.
Don't make me come over there.
Well, the cameras are evidently up and broadcasting, and I believe they're broadcasting only this side of the room, and you don't have any screens.
IT did nothing wrong. Just want to say that for the record.
Facilities.
I know.
Make it like difficult.
Our facilities guy's not here.
Did the remote people
Yeah,
get
that's
their handouts or no?
No, that's the problem. Okay, so
It takes quite a bit of time.
What do you call dominance? Oh, seriously.
Anything else you want to go over?
Chair,
Let's,
to go to the report.
we're going to try to get back to the verbal part of the agenda so we can take up some time. Thank you.
Why don't we skip to, number 9, attachment G. The report on status of services in East Laurinburg. This report is required by 160A, A33B. As you all know, the commission passed a resolution in December to pursue dechartering the town of East Laurinburg. So 160A Article 32 is the statute transitions for unsustainable cities, and we are required, either us or the city, to make this report to the commission. So we put this together with the help of the employee, one of the employees of the city. We're required to report on any of the public services they provide. So on page 2 of the attachment are the list of the public services identified in the statute and whether or not East Laurinburg provides these. So they do provide public streets, lighting and sidewalks, 2.74 miles of streets. We don't know how many miles or feet of sidewalks, and approximately 15 streetlights that are paid for by the town. This service has been provided for at least the last 5 years. That's as far back as we went for this. The town owns a building that functions as town hall and is occasionally rented out for other community activities. They also own 3 vacant lots and 2 trucks, 1 dump truck and 1 flatbed truck. Finally, the city provides solid waste pickup that is provided by contract through a vendor. We did the best we could with the expenditures and revenues, but with the town not having had audited financial statements the last 5 years, these numbers are not audited. The numbers on the streets were pulled from the PAL bill reports that they submit to DOT. And again, we did the best we could with that. This is just a report. There's no action required. We will send this to the town for presentation at their board meeting sometime in the next 60 days, and also at the same time to the Scotland County Board of Commissioners. Again, that is required by the statute.
Sharon, this is, yeah, State Auditor Wood. So who's paying for they're in the hole. Who's paying for that?
They actually do have some funds available, not a lot, but some.
What's your estimate of how it's all going to shake out?
I think they're probably going to end up somewhere between $10,000 and $15,000 in the bank.
Well, this guy, they're about 40,000 in the hole. How can they end up with 15 in the bank?
This doesn't include their property tax revenue.
Okay. Okay.
I only include revenue that was specific to the service. So.
Okay. Any other questions? So what can we expect next in this Laurinburg situation?
The next thing will be we need to get with the county and formalize whether or not they're going to take all of the capital assets. DOT has already agreed that they will be taking the streets, and they will actually be bringing them up to state standards because they're not up to state standards now. And the county informally has agreed to take all the buildings, lots, and vehicles.
And the DOT has agreed in writing?
I have an email.
Amen. That's fine. All right. Okay.
That'll be my next step.
Are we up?
We're all set, Mr. Treasurer. Everything's up and running.
You got to work at NASA. All right. Next.
All right. So the next item on the agenda is the viable utility reserve.
So who's left in the audience?
We've got some folks here from DEQ.
Oh.
We have
Good Baptist on the back row.
get my list out so I don't miss anybody. From DEQ, we have Vic D'Amato, who's going to be co-presenting with Debbie. Jennifer Haney also is here, and John Riscard, both from DEQ. We have Maria Honeycutt on the video. Again, she's the executive director of the Broad River Water Authority, Water and Sewer Authority. And also we have Hank Raper, the Fairmount Town Manager, and David Richardson, the executive director from Lumber River.
I've got your letter right here.
Okay.
You guys want to come up at the table there and?
We'll have our presentation first, Mr. Treasurer, and then I think there'll be
Okay. All right.
So we've got a couple of different presentations to go through about viable utility reserve. If you'll remember last month, the commission voted to table the applications for the merger regionalization of feasibility studies and the asset inventory and assessment grants for several municipalities and the Lumber River COG. Based on the questions that were being asked last month and the fact that we have new LGC members, we opted to kind of go back to the beginning and kind of go through what the viable utility reserve is, what the statute was intended to do for local governments, what our responsibilities are under those statutes, and then we will open up the floor for questions. So I'm going to turn it over to Debbie, who's going to start us off, and then Vic will pick up. And then Maria is going to finish up with her experience at Broad River with these types of grants. I will note that hers were not done through the VUR, but they are the same types of studies that we're asking for funding through VUR for.
Deb, before you get started, do you think that as you go through this, it's going to go right on the pulse of some of the concerns in the previous meeting, or is it sort of a
That's our intention. So that,
Go
with
right to
questions,
polls. Okay.
yes, the questions that were raised last time and some of the concerns we're hoping to answer through this.
Okay.
So we certainly welcome any questions as we go through to make sure we're hitting on all the questions and concerns. As Sharon mentioned, we'll actually have 3 different presenters today. We'll start with a broad look at VUR and go a little bit more narrow with Victor D'Amato from DEQ speaking more directly on some of the grants. And then, as Sharon mentioned, Maria Honeycutt, who's the executive director at Rod River Water, and also a SWIA member, will wrap us up. But we wanted to start basically with a background of the VUR, again, just for some of our new members. And I'll be presenting that part and talking also about the actions the Local Government Commission has taken to date with regards to the VUR. Victor will then present numbers 2, 3, 4, and 5. And I apologize in advance. I meant to mention, I do apologize. We did not get this out in email prior to the meeting. The members here do have printed copies. So for our members who are virtual, we'll be sending this out right after the meeting to you. And if you'd like printed copies, just let us know. But you'll be seeing everything on the screen. And we do have a number of attachments to provide as well. So again, I'll provide some background on the VUR. Victor will go more into the grants and the State Water Infrastructure Authority's role, and then we'll wrap up with Maria's presentation. So we'll go into what I'm going to specifically talk about is the legislation, and talk specifically about the LGC's authority and responsibility under the legislation, a little bit about grants, and a little bit about funding. So the legislation itself that established the Viable Utility Reserve was passed back in July of 2020. And again, in the attachments we're sending you, we'll provide you with a copy of that session law. A stated goal of the act, and literally in the name of the act, is to improve the viability of water and wastewater systems of units of local government. This is a recognition, I think, of the need for a response to these issues. I know in DEQ's infrastructure master plan, they noted back in 2017 that there was a capital need of somewhere between, I think, $17 and $26 billion for water and wastewater systems in the state. So this legislation really recognized that need. And Sharon, I know you have some more information on the law itself.
Right. The law was a culmination of a lot of work by a lot of organizations that recognized the fact that we needed long-term solutions to these issues. I think probably most of us, if you've been around small town government in this state for any length of time, have heard folks say, well, we just need another grant. And our goal with VUR legislation was to make sure that they weren't going to get just another grant. That it was going to be a grant that would solve a problem and help make that system viable in the long term. A lot of folks, like I said, worked several years to make this happen. DEQ, of course, was at the forefront of it. Our staff, the League, the County Commissioners Association, Rural Water Association, CERCAP, a lot of the partners that we work with on these issues every day were working together to make sure that this legislation happened in a way that met the needs of these local governments, again, to make them viable in the long term. This was not intended to be a Band-Aid program. And I think, again, if you've worked with small town utility systems, you've seen those and know what they look like, where somebody gets a grant to rehab a pump station when they really need to rehab their whole system. So that was the goal, and it was a lot of work by a lot of people to make it happen.
Sure. So the LGC got involved in this after 2020, July 1, 2020, statutorily.
Statutorily, they pull us into the approval process.
But since July 1, 2020.
We do not have any approval authority on any of the other grants coming from DEQ or any other organization or utilities, only debt.
So to that point, Sharon, the law itself calls out specific responsibilities and authorities, both for the local government commission and the state water infrastructure authority. And we'll refer to that both as the authority and SWIA. I think most of my materials refer to it as the authority and the SWIA, but just so you're, as you hear those two terms as we go through, they're both referring to the state water infrastructure authority. The main areas, Mr. Butler, as you said, with the legislation for LGC specifically, within the legislation, there are a few other smaller parts, but to me, the primary really areas for the LGC are to identify the stressed units, and that's a joint responsibility with the Department of Water Infrastructure, with DEQ. And then another area of authority for the LGC is to approve grants. So we're going to jump into both of those right now and talk about that responsibility and authority under both those areas. So first, with regards to the identification of distressed units, this is, again, right out of statute. Essentially, as far as this identification of distressed units, the commission and the authority must jointly develop criteria to determine how units should be assessed. And from those assessment criteria, we must identify distressed units, and then we must establish a frequency of assessment. So we'll circle back to the top with those criteria. So I noted there for you again, just so everyone could come up to speed who might not have been on the commission at the time, what actions the commission has already taken with regards to these responsibilities. And again, in the attachments that you have, if you're here with us in person or that we'll email you, you have these details. So with the identification of distressed units, the first thing we did was develop criteria to assess units, and that was to assess all the units, all the water, wastewater systems in the state, being developed with Division of Water Infrastructure staff, about 20 different criteria. They addressed statutory criteria within the law itself. There are specific criteria we consider, and then we looked at management and infrastructure criteria, and we looked at financial criteria. So we're looking at anything from moratoriums and linear feet of pipe to information that the LGC maintains with regards to the financial health of these units. So those 20 criteria were identified and proposed by staffs, and both SWIA and the LGC adopted those criteria for assessing units. Once the units were scored under those assessment criteria, then we needed a way to identify distressed units. And so there are 4 ways a unit can be identified as distressed. A unit can be identified as distressed if it's under control, financial control of the LGC. If it's 2 or more years late with their annual audit. If they have a qualifying score under that scoring scheme we talked about in the first bullet point, or if there's any other information known either to the authority or the commission that we feel is relevant to its condition. So again, those 4 identification criteria were proposed by staffs, and both the authority and the commission adopted those identification criteria. From there, those criteria were applied to all systems in the state, and a list of distressed units was designated. And that you will have that list as an attachment. You have that in your materials, a list of the units that are currently identified as distressed. And distressed is a word specifically used in statute for the identification of these units. So. And then finally, we just have to identify a frequency of assessment, and we've identified that through a recent resolution, how frequently those assessments will be done. So with regards to identifying distressed units, these were the actions required under statute, and these are the actions the commission and the authority have taken to this point. Once a unit is identified as distressed, there are specific statutory requirements. So it's more than just a designation. There are specific requirements of those distressed units, and those are listed there for you. But specifically, the units must conduct an asset assessment and rate study. They must participate in training, and they must develop an action plan with some of the details there for you. But again, so it goes beyond just getting that label of being designated as distressed. There are specific requirements under statute once a unit is so designated. So that section talked about the designation of distressed units. So I just wanted to pause there and see if there were any questions regarding the actions taken so far with regards to identifying distressed units.
Can they apply for state money to do this up front, or they gotta pay for it on their own?
No, they can absolutely apply, and that's what we'll be talking about. You'll see an overlap when you see the type of grants. We'll be talking about the type of grants. And a few slides here, you'll see that there's definitely an overlap.
Do you have a slide that shows the criteria to determine distress units and a list of this?
Yes, they're all in your attachments to your.
Will they be on the screen?
They won't be on the screen because it's an awful lot of pages, and it's just in the interest of space on the screen. Each of the numbers, Victoria, if you could go back one bullet, each of those 3 points that we talked about, I have labeled there on the slide the attachment that correlates to that specific item, and you can see that in your packet. Okay, so I think, so is that it for distressed units? Any other questions on identification of distressed units? And again, these are all actions that the commission has previously taken with regards to filling up the commission's responsibilities under statute. Okay, so into the grants, the VUR legislation again allows units to apply for grants from the Viable Utility Reserve for specific purposes and specific types. It is limited in statute to specific purposes and types, and we'll talk about those on the next slide. But the important part here for the commission is that the commission has the sole authority to approve those grants. The Department of Environmental Quality awards those grants, but they require LGC approval prior to award. So that is the sole authority of the commission under the legislation.
And what are we relying on as the expertise for us to approve?
The award grant, the numbers and the project scopes and things are all developed by the Division of Water Infrastructure.
So we're relying on their recommendations. So we have no expertise on staff to do that.
The grant process as far as water and wastewater projects go, as Sharon mentioned before, there's a number of programs. And this is one of those programs. So I think it would be fair to say, Sharon, we do rely on DWI for that, because they have the expertise across a broad number of grant programs and loan programs, and the commission was brought in the legislation just from the approval process. So.
Correct. DWI already had an asset inventory assessment grant program and a merger regionalization and feasibility grant program. This is just a different funding source, if you will, that it comes now through the VUR program. They already were awarding these types of grants out of other state funds.
Victoria, so we won't go into all these, but basically, again, from statute, we are limited to, or the units are limited to the types of grants, or sorry, the purposes of the grants that they can apply for. And basically, as Sharon said, the legislation really is looking towards long-term solutions. So the allowable purposes allow these systems either to be interconnected, to be rehabilitated, decentralized, or for some studies to get to those points, essentially. One last provision allows for emergency operating grants to units under the financial control of the LGC, and those types of grants have been awarded to both Eureka and Cliffside Sanitary District. But again, under statute, these are the allowable purposes for grants. And then on the following slide, we have the allowable types of grants. So the purpose of covering this was just to show that we are limited, again, under statute by what types and purposes of grants can come before you for approval and can be applied for through DEQ. So Victoria, the next slide. And again, those are the types of grants, the AIA grants that you've heard about, the MRFs, project grants, and then, as we said, the emergency operating grants. So that's the discussion on grants. So the next part is obviously, how does that funding, if someone applies for a grant, where is that funding coming from? And there are right now 2 sources of funding for the VUR grants. One is the $9 million that was appropriated in the original legislation back in 2020. And the second source of funds is going to be just over $450 million of ARPA. That's the American Rescue Plan Act funds that were appropriated in the state's 2021 Appropriations Act. So we'll break each of those down a little bit more. Of the $9 million, for just over $4 has been approved to date. These are, again, actions the commission has already voted on and taken in the past. Again, $245,000 in emergency operating grants and the balance in study grants and AIA grants. So again, out of 9 so far, just over 4 has been approved. And today, what we'll have in front of you on the next slide is just over $3 million asked for your consideration for just over $2 million in AIA grants and about $718,000 in study grants. So again, if you think of the $4 million we talked about and the $3 million, if that were approved today, we're talking just about 7 out of the $9 million at that point would have been awarded. So the second source of funding is that ARPA money. Again, it's $456 million. Out of that, just over $89 million was awarded in the appropriations bill via direct grants. You do have a list of those in your packet, which units received those direct appropriations. So that 450 or so million minus those directed grants leaves a balance of about $353 million. What's important here about this money, or what's different, I should say, about this money, is that it is ARPA money that's coming through from the state. So that has restrictions and limitations on it, both from time limits and things like that. So that money will have specific restrictions on it because it is ARPA money. I know that you're going to get into that a little bit more later too, just with regards to, I know by 2024, all ARPA money, at least, I don't know if that'll change at all, but for now, by the end of 2024, all ARPA money needs to be encumbered. And by the end of 2026, it all needs to be expended. So there is a certain timeliness to those funds that are available. And that wraps up the overview from a legislation perspective. What we'd like to do next, I'll definitely take questions if we have any before we move on. But again, what Victor is going to address next is give you some information on the State Water Infrastructure Authority for those who might not have worked with it before. I know a lot of you are familiar, but we just wanted to provide that, that introduction and background. And then he'll talk more specifically about the grants and how those work and how those projects work. And then, as Sharon said, finally, Maria is going to wrap us up, which I think will give you really good perspective on how does all this actually come together to form a long-term solution. So Maria's had that experience as an executive director, again, not through the VUR, only because it's such a new program, but with DEQ and how essentially an AIA leads us to a solution. So are there any other questions on that part of the presentation, or shall we move on to DEQ? Shall we move on to DEQ?
Debbie, I'll just add real quick that we identified approximately 95 units as distressed in our first pass at this. So, I mean, that hopefully will give you some idea of the scope of problems that we're dealing with. We've got 95 out of, what, about 500 or so public utility systems. So 20% of them, if my math is right, which I have no guarantee that it is, you know, are in bad enough shape that they scored out as distressed, or either they're units that we're in control of.
Sharon, are we approving that the grant is for a unit that we have described as distressed? Is that the only thing we're approving?
Yes.
So we're not approving the engineering or the need or any of that. We're just signing off that that the grant is for a unit that we have determined is distressed.
Well, we're also signing off, and y'all jump in if I don't say this right, but we're also signing off that they use it for that particular purpose. So an AIE grant, they have to use that money for asset inventory and assessment work. Merger regionalization and feasibility study, they have to use that money to look at what are their options to stay viable. Will they survive as a standalone system? Would they do better to decentralize? Would they do better to merge with a neighboring utility? All those things are on the table for the MRF studies.
And who on our side is going to sign off and recommend approval on that when it comes over from their side?
comes over from DWI after SWIA has looked at it and signed off on it, and then it comes to LGC for approval.
I don't know, Sharon, perhaps if what Victor's getting into might address some of this, but I did want to make a quick note specifically, Mr. Butler, on the use of the word distress, that you were just voting on distressed units. There was a resolution adopted both by SWIA, I believe, and for the commission, definitely, that allowed funds to be used for units not designated as distressed, but that were part of a partnership. So in some of these cases, we're working to create regional partnerships, or the DEQ is working potentially to create some regional partnerships. And so some of these units, if they're part of a partnership, might be in that list of units. Are all of the units in this one designated as distressed?
Well, let me put this on the table. So we've all, I'm the only board member east of I-95, and I'm the only board member who lives in a rural area. I was a county manager in Sampson County for 10 years. There is nobody that has a greater appreciation for what's going on in small rural communities than I do in Garland and places like that. I mean, I have been on board for years that we are going to have problems in these small communities with their water and wastewater. People in the, how does that fit into LGC? There's no bonds here. I mean, what, are we just kind of, that's where I'm having a problem of understanding what is our role. We're not engineers, we're not water people. We're just being asked to sign off on something that's been sent to us. I mean, and there's where I'm at a loss. And we can talk about regionalization later, but there's where I have a failure to understand, a failure to communicate, as they said, you cool hand lose. I have a failure to communicate here of what role, what expertise do we have on this that has just been created since 2020? And that's the question that I have is how did we get pulled into this, and how are we signing off on this? And that's the issue that I don't understand. What are we bringing to the table other than the reputation of the LGC? That nothing goes south. Everything we've passed hasn't basically failed yet.
One of the reasons we got pulled in is because of the fiscal distress we were seeing in the small rural governments, both city and county, due to the lack of management or effective management of their utility systems. And so, we were seeing local governments that water sewer fund was having to borrow money from the general fund just to pay their bills, that kind of thing. Part of the distressed determination, a good chunk of it, not the whole thing obviously, but comes from the financial data that we have here. We pull out of their annual audit.
That's still, we're just signing off that the community's distressed, and here are the reasons why it's distressed. We're not signing off on the engineering that we have knowledge. Are they doing the right engineering, the right thing at the right time, in the right place, and with the right people?
No, and that's not our role.
But we're being asked to approve that. Am I?
In addition to the approval from the SWIA folks, which they do have that expertise.
Yeah. Well, I would be you, sir.
Turn the floor over. Not having been involved with the creation of the viable utility that I started in May, I don't know how LGC got pulled in, except that have been partners at a lower level with us for approving debt for local governments.
Yeah,
we've been working together on other programs, but it's a really good question. I think my slides will help at least give some assurance that SWIA, which is the partner, so on the commission side, it's LGC and SWIA, and then on the staff side, it's the Department of State Treasurer and the Division of Water Infrastructure. So you can at least learn about what our process is and hopefully have comfort that the expertise and the vetting that it goes through with the SWIA board provides what you need to approve it. But I can't explain how you got involved in the first place. So.
The legislation pulls us together in a partnership with SWE. Do I understand that
That's
correct?
correct.
So, I mean, would it be staff's advice to us that if it gets to us and SWE has already approved it, we should just assume that all that work has been done?
SWE was backwards.
Comes to us first?
Without the technical stuff being done before.
Is that accurate? We've always had it first, then handed it off to them.
We've only had two.
We don't even know what.
But I'm going to Mr. Burns's.
We've only had 2 votes so far. And last time we did bring it to the commission before the
Right.
authority, only because of the calendaring issues, quite honestly, and because of how the meetings fell. But we've determined that obviously that's not a good order. That we,
Fix that.
moving forward, the authority will always view it first before the commission sees it.
I agree with my colleagues' concerns here that we shouldn't be approving $1 million grants if we don't have some assurance that it's going to be spent on what it should be spent on, and we don't have the expertise to determine what that is. I'll be much more comfortable if it comes through SWIA and they say this is all lined up and they need $1 million. Then I can look and see whether it's distressed and see if SWIA has approved it. Then I can vote in favor. That to me would be much more sensible way to do it.
A statement like we have here. The LGC staff recommends approval of the financing request on the March 22 agenda. That means we're putting it on these people here have told us it's ready to go. I'm suggesting we have a statement. You have signed off, you're comfortable with how it's going to be done. All we're doing is just passing it through because it got brought up in some committee in the summer of 20.
SWIA has approved the project.
Sam, you got some insight on this?
Paul's chairing now. Go ahead, Sam.
Sam Watts, legislative liaison. I was involved in partially working through the legislation. Part of the logic of having the LGC approval, and I think it would be consistent with what the General Assembly was thinking, that the LGC would go second on these approvals. It is sort of analogous to the bank has already agreed to make the loan, typically, before it comes to the LGC. If you're saying that it can handle it financially, that it's makes sense. The General Assembly knew that there was going to be a lot of grants and a lot of loans, a lot of funding needed for this. And the LGC has a good reputation with the General Assembly as a board that's willing to say no when no needs to be said. Something is not a good financial deal or it's not in the best interest of the local government, the taxpayers, the LGC is typically very courageous and insulated enough to say this really isn't in the best interest. There's also the expected that we would cooperate very closely with SWIA because sometimes units need to be brought along brought to the table when there may be dysfunctional governance of some sort. The LGC is well suited to make sure that local governments are held to the letter of the law.
Good.
I just wonder.
I think we've got that thing part fixed.
If we got it fixed, they're going to do it first.
Yes.
And also in the resolution you have before you for the grants today, we do state in the resolution itself, and we will going forward, that what you're viewing has already been approved by the commission, by the authority. So the last statement in the resolution for the grants today is that the authority has approved them at their February 9th meeting. So that is documented in the resolution.
So that part's fixed.
Forever.
Secretary Marshall.
Is there any particular criteria that we should be looking at, or is that deferred to SWIA?
Criteria with regards to the.
Well, what we are to evaluate.
Where, when, how, what.
Yeah.
Whatever
I mean, I certainly can explain how it got there. We were just, as Sharon said, we were just doing Band-Aid patching things on problems that were much larger than the local unit of government could fix. Even the best efficient run in dwindling population towns and losing water customers just didn't have the financial resources. So this was a solution to fix that, to give a broader approach to different municipalities, allowing them to consolidate or regionalization, or we just didn't have any tools in our toolbox other than approving or disapproving these Band-Aids. But going back on criteria.
Secretary Marshall, I think as we get into the slides that may address some of your questions as far as how these units, once distressed or once they apply for those grants, are prioritized, or how those funding decisions are made. So that might answer some of your questions as we go through this slide, perhaps.
Vic, as you go through those, just be aware of what the board's interested in. The board is interested in the fact that sometimes people make the time fit the chore. The chore fit the time, and the same thing happens with budgets. Or that, hundreds of thousands of dollars be spent on a study of 23 customers when you could put a septic system in for all those 23 customers. Or that this, and nobody will ever look at them.
I'm old enough to remember when the Farmers Home Administration paid for all the countywide water and sewer studies that we were doing in Duplin County and Sampson County, and those are just notebooks stacked up on the shelf, and that's I've just seen that, and I just wondered how we got to the dance, which I spoke to some people yesterday downtown, and they couldn't really understand how or remember how we got to the dance. And if it's just us signing off that, yes, this community, we helped develop a distress list, and yes, this community you're sending in for this grant to do whatever you want to do, yes, it's on the distress list, and that's all of our responsibilities. I don't have any problems with that. I need to see the real need for it. Where I just don't see that we have the staff or the expertise to address the engineering aspects of it.
So we're hyper-focused on the money that's being spent is resulting in another clean glass of water and the ability to flush the toilet. At the end of the day. So, talk about everything else, but does it result in another glass of clean water at a reasonable price with a level of certainty?
And while we're laying it all out on the table, if some of the money initially can be spent to see, can a regional organization be put together? I chaired the Lower Cape Fear Water and Sewer Authority. From its birth to when we pumped the first drop of water, gallon of water down to Wilmington and Brunswick County. From its financing, permitting, construction, there's plaques on the wall down there, locking down number 1 on the Cape Fear River, my name all over it. So I've had a little bit of experience in this. And I just wonder, should we look, if we even think we do a regional approach, let's determine if we should fund and seek a regional, statutory approved regional organization be approved, which is allowed under these statutes. And let the regional organization then decide what studies is going to be done from the communities that are within the region, rather than the communities doing the study and then trying to form a regional organization and then hand them a study to say, here, we want you to implement this. It just seems like the cart is way before the horse. And I'm not saying anything that I didn't say last month.
Maybe as I go through the purpose of the different grants and how it plays into the statutory requirements, that'll help clarify. Most of my presentation, there's some background slides, but a lot of it is just on the process and how we're envisioning with the tools that we have, that is the grants and the statutory requirements, how we're trying to pull those together to allow communities to.
Now, those are statutory requirements that relate to you, your agency,
and
not the statutory requirements that relate to us, that it just be brought to us and we approve.
The statutory requirements for the distressed units. Once designated as distressed, those units have specific requirements under statute, including the AIA and the education and things like that. So that's some of the
I'm cool with all that. I'm cool that Sharon and our group will take off and find out exactly who the distressed companies are, who these units are. It's the engineering study side that I don't think that we have the expertise to sign off on.
And again, I think maybe Vic, if we could circle back to questions, Vic's slides.
Ready? Okay. Yeah, so I just wanted to start off with that, just a really quick introduction to the Division of Water Infrastructure. So we're analogous, I guess, to the Department of State Treasurer in that we are the staff for SWIA, which is the State Water Infrastructure Authority. It was created in 2013 by pulling together, previous to this, there were different funding programs, the Department of Environmental Quality, but also in Commerce and other departments, divisions, and that was all pulled together sort of under one umbrella with the idea that would create efficiencies, both in terms of, administering funding, but also compliance and money management and things like that. So since 2013, it has been the Division of Water Infrastructure. The same legislation also formed SWIA. You can see we've got about 50 staff. We're in a hiring mode. So if you're looking to hire your own engineer to evaluate these grant proposals, you'll be competing with a lot of folks, including us. So again, support SWIA and basically do everything on the engineering side as it relates to these projects. So it's creating the criteria and vetting it through the public process, as well as SWIA in terms of how we're going to review applications. It's preparing, of course, the application forms, receiving the applications, doing application training, which we've been doing the past couple of weeks. Because we usually have two funding cycles per year. It's approving and reviewing those engineering reports that are required before an infrastructure project proceeds. Reviewing the plans and specifications, so digging down more into the details, and then following through with the construction. Of course, that plays into funds disbursement back to the awardee. And then that last bullet there, we do a lot of other stuff, and particularly in the Viable Utilities Unit, we are working with these units, the distressed units, on a daily basis. So
may I ask you one question now? Is the unit, are they the entity that have signed a contract with an engineering company?
Yes.
So let me say that again. So the engineering company works for the unit.
Correct.
You're just advising them.
We have to approve, well, and I might defer to John, who's been here for longer than me, but we do we approve the contract? I mean, we basically take it through the bid process. So, yeah, and maybe fill in on when the loan is finalized, but it's after it's gone through.
But my main question was, is the owner is the unit of government that is signing the contract. The engineer's deliverable is to the unit of government.
Correct. And we reimburse the government for expenses.
Yeah, whatever, Lawrenceburg, whatever the community, whatever the county is. All right, that's, I just want to be, and you're just kind of monitoring, helping, guiding, advising through these steps here.
Yeah, for some programs, it's softer, like the Viable Utilities. We're trying to get everyone on the same page, working together in partnerships. In others, we're a little more, we have to ensure compliance with federal regulations.
Are you involved in the bidding to solicit engineering services?
Want to say anything on that, John?
We do a review. We're not making a compliance judgment if it's, sorry. It's John Riscard. I'm a section chief within the division, and our staff would be making sure that they are doing the request for qualifications. We're doing a review to make sure they follow the steps, but we're not judging necessarily compliance if they're followed.
So let
uniform
me ask this another way. So a business development officer with X engineering company, a business development officer of XY engineering company, and another business development, they've been courting this municipality and they want to be on the bid list to be considered to render the engineering services. You're not involved in any of that.
No, sir.
And so it's the owner of the customer, the municipality, the public body, they hire the engineer.
Correct. Okay. Yeah, and guess the last point here is with that staff, we have a wastewater, basically engineering team and a drinking water engineering team. And then, like I said, the viable utilities group, we work closely with the Department of State Treasurer, and we have 3 engineers in our group, but we also have like training specialists, Jennifer, and some of the more softer skills to be able to sort of work the political aspects of bringing folks together. So next slide. So, you know, why DWI? We're already managing, why was the viable utility reserve put under the division? I mean, probably for obvious reasons, but clearly, you know, with the formation of the division is to have all that expertise in terms of money management as well as the engineering side under one, you know, umbrella. So we're administering federal and state funding. In some cases, they're kind of combined, like the state revolving fund, which Mr. Butler, you may remember from some of the earlier funding that's been dispersed. That program's been going on for a long time, but it is a federal program. It's, you know, money appropriated by Congress through EPA that comes to the states to administer according to their own priorities and so forth. So it's really a combined program. The CDBG is more of a federal program with a lot of flow down restrictions, but then the legislature created these state reserve programs. And the state reserve program originally was intended to fund, just to have a discretionary pot for grants as well as loans for drinking water and wastewater projects. And then over the years, or a couple of years, with SWEA's experience, recommendations, and really thinking about how to get more bang for the buck, the legislature authorized the AIA and MRF grants under the state reserve program. So the whole purpose is really to make sure that the projects that come out, the big dollar projects, have had that appropriate level of planning so that those
under the block grant, do you handle the block grants for water and sewer, the new industries that's going? We approved earlier a product here. What was the Tarboro one for the foundry? It was 200, but they had to have the whole water system redone. Does that come through y'all? The block grants to do water and sewer lines to new industries that locate in the state?
Yep. So yes, our division administers community development block grants for infrastructure program. It's about $25 million a year. It is a housing type of grant, but it's for water and wastewater projects.
But you don't do the housing, that's still
correct.
So it was just the water part of it was split off and given with y'all.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. The last point here is the viable utility reserve is analogous to the state reserve program, and it also references those established grants under the SRP, that is the AIA and merger regionalization feasibility. And for the viable utility reserve, there are, as Debbie showed, different types of grants that are eligible, different types of approaches that are eligible, but bottom line is anything that's funded under the VUR has to be going towards efforts that help the unit, the local government unit, have a viable, sustainably operating, revenue-based, ratepayer-based system. So to get them off the sort of grant cycle, if you will. So the seats, there's 9 members of SWEA established in the legislation and codified in the statute. As I said, that body began in 2014. The seat holders have varied a little bit over time, but we've got some really long-term folks who have been involved in over the years. So really, really strong at-large seats that you can see there, and that, you know, includes not only the seat holder and their organization, but what the statute requires in terms of seat holder qualifications, as well as the employee.
Now, does this organization have a standalone staff?
No, we are the staff.
You're the staff.
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
She's the staff.
And Sharon, as Secretary of the Local Government Commission, has a seat on the authority.
Okay. Okay. So The statute also defines the powers and duties of the State Water Infrastructure Authority. Didn't want to list all those powers. There's a lot of overlap, let's say, but I wanted to point out B and D because they both directly relate to where we're going and basically the formation of the viable utility program. To evaluate statewide water infrastructure funding needs, you heard some numbers thrown out earlier of that big ticket number. But as part of that effort, the SWIA developed an infrastructure master plan through which the whole distressed designation as well as what is a viable utility is kind of flowed from that. So it's consistent with a plan that has, gone through a pretty extensive process. Also, as part of that legislation and statute, so, 7-8 years ago, the need for a troubled system protocol, which of course is the distress designation and led to this program. Just put the meeting dates up there to show you that, we're a little off cycle. Next year, we're going to try to get it so that SWIA meets a week or so before local government commission, and that should even things out a little bit. Next slide. So this is just a map of, and I know you can't read it, but hopefully in your materials you can, if you want to, of where different types of projects, construction projects, as well as grants, study grants have been awarded across the state. Total SWIA awards since 2014 is about $2.6 billion. That includes construction. We have awarded 264 asset inventory and assessment grants, not under the BUR, this is all, and 51 MRF grants. And just to put the costs in perspective a little bit, the AIA grants have totaled for those 264, 31.6 million, roughly $4 to $6 million or $4 to $8 million per year, AIA grants funded.
Now, let me ask you, of those grants, those are inventory, so how many of those have gotten implemented?
That I don't have a number for you. We ask when we receive a funding application for a construction project, whether it's based on the results of an asset inventory and assessment. We've just started doing that, so we don't have great connection between the study grants and projects. But anecdotally, I can tell you that the grants identify essentially what pipes, pumps, blah, 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 need attention. And a lot of what we fund is rehab and rehabilitation. So a lot of it's coming out of these sort of early efforts to start to develop what we call an asset management plan, which is what that AIA grant
helps. Firm number.
I do not have a firm number.
264 of these, and of those 264, 200 of them have been implemented. What study called?
It also gets into what do you mean by implemented, because really the AIA is a long-term look, recognizing that it's not just a one-time, hey, here's your projects. Once you do that, good. Those projects are going to cycle back around again as pipe, degrades over time. So your needs are constantly changing. So the way I think of the AIA grant is it starts a unit on the path to just being much more proactive about what they need to be doing, while also identifying the immediate needs. But a lot of the applications that we get are based on some kind of asset management plan. Okay. And we score, I believe we score priority points for those that are based on an asset management plan. So it's tied into how we rank applications. We don't fund everything. We do have loan programs, as you guys know, as well as grant programs, and they're all scored using a standard methodology that includes lots of different factors. Okay.
Anything that seems obvious, you can skip over it.
In this?
No, anything on each slide that seems so obvious, you can.
Sure. I'm trying to be careful about time. Did want to say that the division has funded every MRF application that's been submitted to date. SWIA sees that effort as being strong enough to fund them. They are a limited amount of money that are funded from the state reserve program. But anyway, so the infrastructure master plan, basically sets forth this idea of a viable system and what that means, what the definition is. comes down to is looking at performance of the unit in these three areas: infrastructure, organizational, and financial. That ties into the distress criteria, how we define a viable versus a distressed unit, and also ties into how we review applications and how we think about the action plans that distressed units need to do to meet their statutory obligations. So you can go next slide, please. So here's kind of a mapping, and this is starting to get into the process a little bit, and I think this will help you. This is a mapping of essentially the statutory requirements. Debbie actually had this in a slide that was bulletized. This is just in a table, as well as what, and Mr. Butler, I think you asked, do we pay for this? And this is how, with the tools we have, we can pay for distressed units to meet their statutory objectives.
Now, is this a result of the viable utility reserve fund, or is this from coming back from 2014?
No, this is evolving. This is where we are now.
This is a culmination of where we are from 2014. This didn't come from last year when it was put in there that the LGC has to sign off on.
This is part of what we talk about with Division of State Treasurer and internally Department of State Treasurer.
The statutory requirements are from.
The statutory requirements are. So what's on the left is, but those are the statutory requirements that came from the 2020 legislation. On the right is the funding mechanisms that the division has that can help distressed units meet these obligations. So you can say that they are also statutory.
I think what we're trying to do here was sort of map so that you could see what these units were required to do under statute once they were designated as distressed, with how these AIAs and MRFs play into those requirements of those units. So you could see there were questions about the purposes of the AIAs and MRFs and how those got us towards long-term solutions. And this mapping that Vic did is trying to give you that correlation between what these units are required to do and what these grants will help them to do.
And we get questions, of course, all the time from distressed units of what do we do now? Here, because they just have the statute. So here's how we can say, you're required to do an asset assessment and rate study, and DUR has an grant available to do that. So that one is directly tied to the statute. Participate in training and education program, part of, I think, what you're considering today are automatic training grants, so to provide a certain amount of money, a relatively modest amount of money to each distressed unit, $2,000, to support what they have to do by statute, but then also to help them kind of operationalize training and education for their board members as well as their staff, because it's critically important and it's often forgotten, particularly in budgets. Where the rubber really meets, sorry, you have to go back.
Sorry.
This is an important one, is the action plan. That's really where it all comes together. Short-term and long-term plan for infrastructure repair, maintenance, management. Again, continuing education as part of that plan, and then the long-term financial management. So that's where the short-term plan is like a capital improvement plan that is a deliverable of an AIA study. The long-term plan is what are you going to do to make sure you have a viable system 20 years down the line. It's not going to come out of an AIA. It's going to come out of a bigger study. And that's where we look at this merger and regionalization feasibility. And that basically directs, if you receive that grant, you can study any alternatives that might be viable, and they would have to work with us to determine what that list is. But part of that has to be some element of regional cooperation. It does not have to be physical infrastructure interconnection, but we want to make sure that these units are talking to their neighbors. Maybe they can share administrative functions. Maybe they can share operators for really small units. This is also where, like, Lumber River comes into play, and we've got a bunch of small units down there that there's not one natural one that could be the receiving entity for all these other units. So they need to explore, can we form an authority to do this and move this forward? So you can move on now. Okay, so a little more about asset inventory and assessment. You can read the definition there. Again, it is required of designated units unless they have a recent effort. Some of them do, or they've already been funded for an AIA and they've got that information. We want to make sure it's comprehensive, it's recent, it's up to date. You can see the eligible activities. We do expect a capital improvement plan, which is that short-term plan, and the rate study, which is also required as deliverables of that. But you can see some of the other things that are done very, very resource intensive, determining just finding system components, particularly for buried infrastructure, can be very, very time consuming, and then doing everything else on that, assessing the condition, the criticality, and working through that process, and then coming up with, okay, what are your priorities to get where you need to be? Next slide. So this was just to find an example from an AIA that we could put up here. And the point I wanted to make here is if you look at some of the quantity items in the budget there that are the bigger numbers, those are linear feet of line. So you can see just, this is a $165,000 project. It's about seven linear feet of smoke testing and two or three miles and 2 or 3 miles of more elaborate testing. That's $150,000. For our distressed units, they average about 40 miles of water and 40 miles of sewer. So you can see where that can really add up if you're looking at the whole system. So the merger regionalization feasibility studies, again, allows for hopefully the full array of potentially viable long-term solutions to be considered. And that's something that we're really pushing as part of the Viable Utilities program. Is it's not sufficient to just come in and say, we want to replace our entire system and would like a grant to do it. We need to make sure that there's not cheaper alternatives, essentially getting to Secretary Falwell's point. And it allows for fleshing out those options, like creating an authority, creating interlocal agreements that protect all parties. So it's a broad category that can be used to either just explore, can these people work together, or take it to, hey, we can form an authority, and here are the steps we need to do that. Okay. Quick word on partnerships. We have a lot of partners. The Department of State Treasurer is probably our strongest and our most critical because it's statutory, but we work with a lot of other resource partners, and the one I want to call out are the COGS. Not only are the COGS great because they're on the ground, they're often seen by the partners in an area as being impartial. They're certainly trusted more than the state is trusted, I think, in a lot of these things. But the legislation and the statute actually recognizes that it's the only program that we administer that can directly fund COGS, and that's by statute. This just shows where we have units. You can see that the red and the orange dots are the distressed units. The gray dots, all the dots are all the utilities that Sharon mentioned, 500 plus units. You can see we've got some pretty tight clusters down east or in the eastern part of the state. More makes sense, as anyone who travels the state knows. In the western part of the state, the units tend to be a little more isolated, so there's a little less opportunity in some cases for partnerships. Next slide. And this just shows, and I'm sorry if it's not all that legible, but shows the locations of the units that have been taken over by the local government commission and where partnerships have been formed around those. That's work that's been done by DST as well as us, as well as, of course, the units themselves, COGS in some cases, to try to identify partners, get them together and start playing together and working together well. See, we've got a Cleveland County partnership that's Kingstown. We've got Martin County, Robertsonville is the unit that's under your control, and then Wayne County, which I'll use as an example where we have 2 such units. The yellow pins are just other areas like the Lumber River Partnership where we've been talking to them, we've been going to meetings, and we've been encouraging them to get together, but they're not funded yet. And then this just, I won't spend much time on this, but just to indicate that the process for partnerships that we see working well is to make sure each particularly distressed unit does a complete AIA, because they really, if any partnering unit is considering merging with that unit, they're not going to do it unless they know what they're getting, unless they know what they're buying, what they're taking on. So they really need to have that information going into an MRF study that then looks at, okay, is there a larger player in the area? I'll use the example of Wayne County, which was in the previous slide. We've got some distressed units, some non-distressed units. They're all been funded for AIAs. That work is proceeding. Goldsboro is the lead entity for the MRF. The reasons are they're the most likely system to be connected to. They're the largest player. And being that large player, they have an engineering staff, so they know how to manage engineering contracts. They know how to pull complex projects together. So they're going to be taking the information from these different AIAs, looking at, potential synergies where we can connect, and then coming up with recommendations for all of those distressed units. Okay. So these kind of the closing slides. Just wanted to give you a little more appreciation for what happens when or in preparation for funding, and then when an award is funded and what the timelines look like. So as I mentioned, we, in one of the first slides, the division, with SWIA authority, puts together all the application materials, does training, and so forth, receives the applications, scores the applications, and prioritizes them versus a pre-approved system that statutorily we have to have. And then we present those full package to SWIA, hopefully first, and then LGC just for the subset that are going to be funded from the Viable Utility Reserve.
So that's going to be the plan for the future. You're going to put the packages together, run it through the SWIA crowd, and then bring it over to us for final approval.
Sure. Yeah, and
Once they get the calendar synced, yeah.
Maybe even before. Yeah, I think in the last meeting you had all of SWIA's material. They just hadn't seen it yet, but it was the same material being shared.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. So just to be clear, all division funding, all of our funding programs are paid on a reimbursement basis. The unit has to submit allowable expenses. We review those, whether it's construction or engineering or whatever, and then we pay that amount. So they don't have a pot of money that they're just allowed to borrow up until they reach the max. It's based on allowable expenses, eligible expenses. Any undispersed funds go back into the fund, in this case, the Viable Utility.
So when the COGS do these studies, they have to front the cost up front.
A portion of it, they have to incur the costs and then submit.
When does the engineer get paid?
After I might let the COG respond to that, but generally speaking, I guess in a lot of cases, the awardee will pay the engineer, so like you said, front the money. If they can't afford to do that, then they are required, they can submit the invoices to us. When they receive funding, they're required to pay the engineer within 3 days. I think is that more or less right?
Okay, that's
okay. Yeah, so that bottom piece is to illustrate some of the diagram that is, illustrate the steps involved in approving a construction project. And the take-home message here, we've got, the application, the environmental and engineering review and approval, design, plans and specs, review and approval. You get through all that, and in a best-case scenario, that's a 2-year process just to get to the bid date and a contract. So just to impress that these are, especially construction projects, take a while. Which leads us to where we are now, which is, as you've heard, the ARPA funds have changed the outlook of the BUR from a year ago, for instance. Debbie mentioned this, that the funds have to be basically obligated by the end of 2024, which doesn't worry me very much, but having the funds spent when we're talking about construction projects by the end of 2026 is more concerning, considering especially how much demand there's going to be for contractors. So I guess the point that I want to make here, the clear point, is that for a lot of the distressed units, they don't have shovel-ready or design-ready projects. They don't, in a lot of cases, have nothing. So the sooner we can get them into looking at what they have and what they can do with the MRF, the sooner we can get them into funding construction. Next slide. This is just a rehash. So we can just go on to the next slide, which I think is the last one. So Gary mentioned this, you know, what the essentially balances are in the VUR. ARPA does, they are separate pots of money. ARPA has some other restrictions, most notably the date. But what you have in front of you for consideration are 5 MRF projects for the amount you see, 8 ARO, 95 training grants, which will be automatically done, not separate votes or anything like that. So that's a total obligation of $190,000. But the total amount being requested today is less than 1% of what's available right now. And we feel like it's a very important investment to make sure we get good projects, with the goal being that viability essentially means that you can do what you want to do moving forward without grants. This is your last grant, essentially.
Let me ask you something. As like the North Carolina Engineering Association, has this been presented to them to say, what do you think about this? Is this realistic? I mean, law engineering, I mean, some of our major engineering companies in the state of North Carolina, have they looked at this to see if, I mean, what is the lobbyist representing all the engineers? I mean, Elaine, you got a whole list of them at your place. I mean, do they think this is realistic and can be accomplished? And I mean, what you said most probably is that completing it by 26 and you can't get materials now.
Yeah, it's going to be a challenge, but that's our challenge. So if it's to ask, I don't think there's been a formal presentation recently to PENC or anything like that, but like our application training that we've done 6, I think, across the state in the past 2 weeks. And those are attended by a lot of consulting engineers as well as their clients, as well as COGS and others. So they are aware of it.
I will add, this is a nationwide problem. As far as not having enough resources to get all this money under contract and expended in that amount of time. And Congress and U.S. Treasury is aware of it. And so hopefully we will have some news at some point about extensions. Any questions for Vic before we move on to Maria? All right, our last presentation is Maria Honeycutt. She is the Executive Director of Broad River Water Authority, and she's going to talk for just a few minutes about their experience with the AIA grants. She told me to tell you she is not going to go through each one of these slides in detail. So
I'm not. I promise to hit the highlights, but I literally could talk about this for hours. So can you hear me okay and see me okay?
Yeah, proceed.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So just a little bit of background real quick. So originally I'm from Asheville. I have an undergrad and a master's in engineering from NC State. I worked in manufacturing before joining a private civil engineering firm. And then I have managed Broad River Water for 16 years in Rutherford County. We're halfway between Charlotte and Asheville. Broad River is a local government water and sewer authority under General Statute 162A. We purchased Duke Power had a water system here in Rutherford County, and Broad River purchased that in 1999 and took over operations in 2000. I came here in 2006. So this has been my home for 22 years. This industry is my passion. As a side note, as Sharon mentioned, Cliffside Sanitary is in my county, and so is Lake Lure. So a lot of the projects that we've talked about in areas really are my next door neighbors. Secondly, I was appointed to SWIA when it formed in 2013. It really has been a really rewarding experience to have a voice in the process, especially of this VUR funding and collaboration with the LGC to have a real long-term impact on North Carolina water and wastewater utilities. And to the question that the gentleman was asking about, how did the LGC get involved? I was over here like screaming silently that part of our charge for SWIA was to develop a troubled system protocol, which was kind of based off the unit's assistance list that the LGC has maintained for years to look at internal controls. And the LGC was seeing that a lot of the financial and issues in systems were directly related to utilities. And so it really went hand in hand to use the power and authority that the LGC had with the data and Division of Water Infrastructure, which really has no teeth or no power to guide local government entities. So it really was a partnership of who has the power, who has the data, and who can manage the money and allocate it appropriately. So that was my 2 cents on putting that together. The greatest thing about it is that we really have the ability to do long-term things and not Band-Aids. So the third kind of qualification is that I've been a part of North Carolina Rural Water Association as a legislative advocate, a trainer in customer service, and a board member since 2015. And if you're not familiar with rural water, we focus on training and technical assistance support for small to medium water and wastewater utilities. So directly in what we're talking about. So working with these systems as a peer and also as a resource has given me a perspective of those struggles that they have and like an in-depth look behind the scenes where there is no easy button. So next slide. So what I want to talk about really highlights is what is the SWIA perspective of these grants, Broad River's perspective, and then the outcomes we've had, because what I also understood from your meeting before was the concept of how can a plan or a study grant cost $50,000 to $150,000, and how do we know that this money is spent appropriately? So I want to let you know from our perspective the things that went well and the things that didn't, and how we can go forward with that. Okay, next slide. So from a SWIA perspective, you know, the question was asked, are we putting the cart before the horse? And what I want to say is that these tools are fundamental in determining the direction and the options for these utilities, especially utilities that are struggling. So that MRF, the merger regionalization feasibility, truly brings that platform to bring various partners together and look for mutually beneficial solutions, which may not have ever been discussed before, but it cuts through some of that territorial nature of let's discuss different options. And then the AIA is really the core of infrastructure management by bringing out, for us, it was bringing out the unknown deficiencies. Systems have their capital improvement plan lists of things they know need addressing, but there can be a whole host of things that they don't really even know about. So that's one of the pieces where AIA is really beneficial. There are a variety of challenges with the planning grants of this size and scope, especially when you're talking about a small to medium system. But the advantage, and I've got some of those challenges listed, but the advantage is that these plans allow internal management to lead up towards elected officials and boards, because it puts our problems in a business plan. And so there is no emotion to it. There is no, you know, it is a look behind the curtain at the ugly and the dirty, and it puts a cost to the risk of not doing anything, which is how a lot of these systems got to where they are. So I want to share the takeaways and the lessons we've learned. For that note of, we were awarded the MRF and the AIA in 2016. We spent a ton of more money than what the grants, you know, were allowed, because we wanted to do the process fully. And it took 5 years instead of 2, because we did a lot of the work internally instead of, you know, outsourcing it to consultants. But we also have had some really neat next steps identified that is going to put us on a path for continued viability. The one other thing I want to say, Sharon mentioned our project, and you can go ahead and advance, that's fine. Broad River was not determined as distressed, but probably from the years of 2006 and 2009, we absolutely would have been on that list. Barely able to make our bond covenant requirements. So we've had a different look from 2009 forward, luckily, but my heart goes out to these systems because I know where they are. I know where they've been. And these are some of my closest friends that are dealing with this. So that's been interesting. So I want to just give you the highlight on our merger regionalization feasibility study, and I will call it MRF because that is way too many words. But we have a major resale agreement between Broad River, which is in Rutherford County, to Polk County, which is our western neighbor, and into Inman-Campobello, who serves the upper part of Spartanburg County in South Carolina. So we've had this resale agreement since 2009. And our goal was to pursue a longer term relationship where we could jointly work for master planning efforts and jointly own infrastructure. But none of us wanted to do that on a contract basis because at some point a contract ends. So if we were going to invest money to improve our whole system together, we didn't want an end date. So we wanted to look at a win-win-win outcome, which had been the basis of our agreement. So you can advance to the next slide and I'll give you the highlights of how that worked because it really is the coolest thing. So the existing relationship, Broad River is the regional water supplier. We're the one with a treatment plant. We have a 12 MGD plant. We have about 250 miles of water line. I've got our accounts, our sales. So we are a medium system. If you count all the people that we serve, it's actually 52,000 people. So we're not a tiny system, but our home base only uses about half the water that we produce. So the pass through of this project was Polk County to our west. So they own about 7 miles of the 20-inch trunk line that takes the water from Broad River's facility into Inman-Campobello. So they had no county customers in the beginning, but they expanded about 45 miles of water line to hit, emergency services and schools. So they were maintaining that infrastructure, but they don't have a public works department. The county was not in the water business. So the third part, and they don't generate any revenue because it's a pass through. So Inman-Campobello, which is a system that's about twice the size of Broad River, has always been a water purchaser. They purchased from Spartanburg Water before they purchased from Broad River. So they purchase about 3.2 million gallons a day. They have about 500 miles of water line and they've got 14,000 accounts. And they are growing like gangbusters in that area. They are pursuing a new intake and a water treatment plant on the North Pacolet, but the North Pacolet is not as robust as the Broad River where we pull from. So we are trying to look at things we can do together. So with the MRF, we got stuck a little bit and floundered on our objectives because there were so many things that were going on in play. But what I want to break down for you is that the win-win-win was really accomplished by what all three of us wanted to gain, which was a continuation of our sales and purchase agreement and securing additional water supply for the future. The barriers we all had were our political climates and developing this more permanent relationship. And then the ideal was to ensure the viability of Polk County because that was what was right in between us. And they didn't really have the mechanism to do that. And then we wanted to continue sales and gain access to the Green River, which is a more robust water source than the Broad. Okay, so next slide. So what we ended up, the recommendation that was made, and I'm going to tell you what you really want to know here in a minute, so just hang on for me. The recommendation was a hybrid alternative where we want to form what's called the Polk County Regional Water Project. And the purpose is the ownership and the maintenance of Polk County's assets only. The Broad River doesn't give over assets. Inman-Campobello doesn't give over assets, but it takes that Polk County infrastructure out of the county commissioner's hands and puts it into a regional utilities hands. There's a lot of advantages to do those things, which is what met all of our goals. Let's go to the next one. So what you really wanted to know, we got $50,000, but the consultant cost was $92,000. So we had decided to split those costs because we were we wanted to be committed by having skin in the game, and we did several interviews and we went through the whole procurement process, and this is where we landed at 92,000. So they worked for almost a year and a half on a financial analysis, and it just did not net a good option for us. So we cut the contract short with the consultant and the managers. The Polk County manager, the manager of Campobella, and myself kind of hijacked the project and brought it back in-house, and we did the work to find out and figure out what approach would be the best. Then we brought the consultant back in to kind of give their stamp and to understand what we were trying to say all along. And so what that resulted in is that we've now had an amendment to our agreement that just got adopted last month that establishes this regional commission. And our next steps require like legislative changes. So we still have more legal work to do before we actually go forward. But each of us have dedicated $50,000 a year so that we can keep this legal work going. So I see MRF as phase one, just to establish the platform for regional partners to talk and to cut through some of that territorial nature. Okay, so let's move on. So the next one is asset inventory. So I just wanted to walk through just quickly the 5 parts of asset management is knowing what you have from a utility standpoint, knowing what status it's in, does it work or does it not? What are the costs to replace it? How long is it gonna last? And what's the timing and the feasibility? How am I gonna pay for it? Okay, let's move. So $150,000 sounds like a tremendous amount of money. So you can go to the next slide. I want to show you what our plan was originally for how we were going to spend that money. And it's about broken down into, you know, a fourth, and then some other random fourths. That's not even good math. 1/8 and 8, whatever. Anyway, you can look at the numbers. And so it was hard for me to even imagine, how am I going to get this done in 2 years, and how in the world can it cost, for example, $48,000 on condition assessment? So now let's advance to the actual of what actually happened. Okay, so the study, first of all, we didn't know what kind of software was available. So we hired the firm, and I didn't want to talk to 15 different salespeople. That's my nightmare. So we hired the firm to assess all of the different asset management programs. Are they cloud-based? Can we generate work orders? Do we have access to the GIS data through Esri? Like all these things. What's going to work best for us? That took a year to finish. Not all our fault, not all the consultants' fault. And this was pre-COVID. It just happened. Then when we went to purchase the software, the first people we selected, they failed on implementation. So we had to go back to the drawing board, picked another software. It was almost twice as expensive. And then we had this $7,000 server cost that was unexpected. Anyway, we did it. It was fine. So then we stumbled our way through not having a GIS expert on staff because we wanted to map and improve our mapping for all of our assets. So we hired the firm to help us push that forward. That got completed in 2020. So literally 4 years to get us to where our maps, we were comfortable with our map. And the whole time we have been working on, let's identify every piece of equipment we have, which I'm going to show you how elaborate that is. And that answers the question of why did it cost so much and why did it take so long? Then we confirmed the model and had cost estimates done. That was prepared in May before my budget. And now we're working on the formal plan to make it pretty. Okay, so let's go to the next one. This is a map. This is what the result, the big picture result of GIS is. So it's water lines, valves, hydrants, pumps, tanks, all of our stuff. So that little picture is 250 miles of water line that would take 45 minutes to drive from the top to the bottom. So you're looking at Spindale, Rutherfordton, Ruth, and on down at the bottom down to Cliffside and the border of Cleveland County and South Carolina down that way. That's GIS. Okay, so briefly I want to talk about when we talk about condition assessment, what we're really trying to get at is risk criticality. So what is the likelihood of something to fail and what is the consequence of the failure? And that sounds real easy, like, oh, just it's 4 out of 5 or it's 2 out of 5. But when we want it to be really priority ranked and not just somebody's opinion, there are a lot of criteria that we think about. So horizontal assets are our pipes, vertical assets are pumps, tanks, motors, those kind of things. So when we're looking at pipe, which we have 2,686 like 10-mile sections. So think about doing this for 2,686 sections to look at pipe diameter, date of installation, pipe material. All those factors tell you what condition that's in. So we look at the likelihood. How many breaks have there been in the past 12 months? Okay, the next step, next slide, is the consequence of failure. How many customers does it serve? Does it feed a hospital? What is the pipe diameter? Because the bigger it is, the bigger the flow is more important. What's the depth? Is it super deep and it would be hard to repair? So we look at the consequence of failure in this matrix to give our pipes a score, okay? So then on the vertical assets, so one more slide, it's the same kind of thing with likelihood of failure. Well, back up. The likelihood of failure of pumps and motors and even vehicles is how much remaining useful life do we have? Because we want it to be on a life cycle. We don't want it to just burn in the ground before we think about replacing it. And then what's the condition? Okay, so that's what all of that criteria went through. Okay, now next slide. So what, oh, and there's 531 of the vertical assets. So you got 2,686, 531 that went into this spreadsheet that you're looking at. And if you can read that, like, you get a gold star. But what it does is break down every component. You're seeing every component that we own with a purchase date, an install date, the estimated useful life. You've got the criteria of likelihood of failure, consequence of failure, and then all the way over on the far side in the red that goes to orange, that then goes to yellow and green. You're only looking at 40 things right here, but that's how we started looking at this. Electrical panel is the oldest thing we have, and if it goes down, it takes down the whole treatment plant. So that ended up being like the #1 thing. But we're not going to just replace one panel. So then the next slide shows you that your parts have to become projects, and that's where consultants and the institutional knowledge we have says, oh, okay, #1 project there on that table on the side is treatment plant electrical upgrades. So how many of those components can we pick in the red and form a project to do at one time that knocks out these highest priority things? So in that one table, you've got vertical assets of electrical, our raw water intake. If that pipe goes down, we're not bringing any water into the treatment plant. And it was built in '83, and we haven't done anything to it since. And if it goes down, the board says to me, well, why didn't we parallel the line? Like, how in the world could you allow the raw water line to break? And we're like, I don't know, like, it's never had a leak. Like, we never had any indication that it was failing until it fails. And that's not a good approach. And then on the other side with the tables, those are our key water lines. So the ones that feed the hospital, the ones that feed our bulk customers. So then we have our projects. The thing I need to know as a manager and to communicate to my board is how are we going to fund it and when? So then we paid for the cost estimates. And then we have this model that you're looking at, which is my favorite thing, which is it puts the projects, it breaks down the costs of engineering and of completion of construction. How many years is it going to take, and when does that money need to be spent? So at the end of that spreadsheet, at the end of that model, there is a cash flow that shows my board for the next 10 years. There's $20 million that we need to spend to just address those high risk, high criticality parts. So what did this give me? All right, let's go to the last slide, because here's the takeaway. And in none of my practices did I talk this fast, so thank you for hanging on with me. The outcome is that it really took our board to a point of saying, like, let's relook at our strategic plan. What do we want to be as a water utility? We want to be viable long-term, and we want to provide quality of life for our neighbors and our communities. So we rewrote our whole vision, our whole mission, our values. So that was just a base of where these discussions started. And the ultimate goal for me is these two tools served as that business plan that allowed me to get a budget passed, like for the first time we talked about it, with a rate increase that addressed $3 million of capital expenditures in just this year. We allocated $100,000 for the next step master plan that even looks at what's our sludge removal, what are our land applications, what are our tank sites, what do we need to be looking at long term, what are our vulnerabilities? And we've never looked at those things before, and that's an expensive process. We also allocated 40 grand for a hydraulic model. We usually do a lot of that work internally, but that's not my skill set. And so we're gonna hire that out. The board had no qualms about that. And then we ongoing will continue to do the legal fees with Campabella and Polk County. And one of the things that we're investigating right now, which would make sense, is like to put a USGS gauge in the Broad River. We don't have one. And to put one in the Green River, which is where we actually love to be, or to maybe, if we ever needed to tap it, it would be in the next 25 to 50 years. We don't need it now, but if we don't start the planning now, we're never going to have it. And so those two projects were not, they were not intended to take us from distressed to viable, but what it did was take us from a good base really on a successful path for continued viability. It really was an education tool for my elected board, well, they're appointed, but my governing body. And from an employee standpoint, it was really a team effort between all of our departments to talk about, like, what are our objectives, what are our goals, and how are we moving forward. And then the project with Campabella and Polk County, we sell more than half of our water to them. So from a viability standpoint, we collect $1.3 million off of them a year. I need that relationship to continue. And so it was a way to solidify our biggest customer. So all of these, none of that work would have been possible without the money. And I also want to say, somebody had a question about, does DWI look at contracts and are they executing that? They don't execute like the procurement process, but I have to submit any contract that I sign before it's slated for grant funding. So there is a review. So if a consultant wants like $50,000 for one presentation, that's not going to fly. So there is a review step that I wanted to let you know, which as a SWIA member, I didn't know that happened, but as a grant recipient, I do. So that can give you a comfort level on the projects that are being picked and the execution of how that money is being spent.
Hey, Maria.
Yes, sir.
I don't want to lose a quorum to adjourn, so let's go ahead.
I'm done. If there's any question, I'm finished, but if there's any questions, I'm happy to entertain it, and I appreciate the time that you took to listen.
Thank you, Maria.
Thank you, Maria. You were on a slide that I didn't see in my packet, and I said, boy, I'm missing out here. So I went all the way to the thing. Thank you for your service.
Sure, thank you.
And your passion and your ethics. So
thank you.
Real deal.
So we have one last call for questions. We have two resolutions for you regarding the VUR program. The first is approving the MRF and AIA grants. This is essentially the same resolution that you had last month. Does anybody need me to go over the details?
Any questions? The folks from the con.
We do have with us the folks from Lumber River Cog.
Who we all got a letter from.
Yeah, we did get your letter, and that's been shared with the commission members. Thank you. And also the manager from Fairmont, who is probably going to end up being the lead municipality in this region.
hear a motion to accept staff's recommendation and approve these?
For now, first, look at this. Training.
So now we're approving the grants, the MRF and AI. Attachment D.
D. Do I hear a motion?
Move approval.
Thank you. Second? Motion second being made. Any further discussion? Hearing none, the clerk will call the roll.
Okay, this is the VUR resolution to approve MRF and AIA grants. Burns, Marshall, Auditor Wood. Come back. Okay, Secretary County
Yes, aye.
and Mr. Butler. No, Ms. Hoffman.
Aye.
Thank you. Mr. Philbeck, are you still there?
He is not.
Not? Okay, absent. Treasurer Falwell,
Aye.
Auditor Wood. Oh, here we are. We're voting on the MRF and AIA grants.
Aye.
Thank you. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 to 1. Motion carried. We have 2 absent. 6 yes, 1 no, and 2 absent.
Mr. Philbeck had to take a siesta since it's his birthday. Next is go ahead.
The next and last resolution is attachment F, the resolution approving the VUR training grants. This approves grants to all distressed units of $1,000 from the VUR funding to training that's required of these local governments. This is on a reimbursement basis. It's only for tuition and mileage, so there will be no issues about cost of hotel rooms or meals. And anything that's not expended out of that 2,000 would return to the VUR pot of money, so to speak. The training grant would go through calendar year 2025. And again, it would be handled on a reimbursement basis with the folks at DWI signing off.
Okay. Do I hear a motion to approve?
Move the item.
Okay, thank you. Second.
Second, State Auditor Wood.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Hearing none, the clerk will call the roll.
Okay, training grants, Hoffman, Wood. Secretary Marshall? Aye. Secretary Penny?
Aye.
Thank you. Mr. Burns?
Aye.
Mr. Butler? Harvey absent. And Treasurer Falwell?
Aye.
Thank you.
And lastly? Oh, that's it. Okay. I would suggest that with Mr. Butler's pedigree on this subject, that all those who have been participating in this call, regardless of what part of the state that you're from, that you understand that this is something that he has a subject matter expertise on, and that more questions that he can get answered crisply, the more confidence that I think that this subject will bring to the entire board and all of us who don't have quite his expertise. With that, go around the horn before I ask for Secretary Marshall to lead us in the motion of adjournment. Anybody by Zoom have anything?
Ladies and gentlemen, I would like us to.
I'll see if they have anything.
Sorry.
Just for the good of the order. Okay.
Nope, not me.
Alder Wood, I brought you a list of auditing firms. It's in Triangle Business Journal. I'll get it to you sometime, okay?
Thank you.
Anybody? President? Secretary Marshall.
I'd like to ask us to unanimously adjourn in honor of Ukraine and Moldova. North Carolina, 30 years ago, in an arrangement with the federal government, State Department, Department of Defense, had a military partnership with the Republic of Moldova. That later grew to a civilian partnership, which I have co-chaired the North Carolina side since 1997. Ukraine sits here, Moldova sits like this, 2/3 surrounded by Ukraine, the other borders with Romania. Today is Matasur. That's what I'm wearing. March 1 in the Slavic world and Eastern Europe is known as Matasur. It is the first day of spring. It is generally spring, new horizons, new hopes, and looking for the future. That, unfortunately, for the people that we have been working with in Moldova these last 20 plus years and their families in Ukraine and all are under a tremendous amount of stress. Currently, there have been 89,000 refugees to come into tiny Moldova. About 30,000 of those are moving on to Romania to get to a NATO country. Moldova is not a NATO country. We've just got a lot of personal connections. They need your prayers. They need your financial help if possible. And next week, we're doing a nursing meeting on refugee care. Our nursing here in North Carolina have done tremendous things. Our doctors, our pharmacists, what have you. So we are offering all support that we can. And this is all voluntary support. There's not a state dollar in it other than some National Guard money, but most of it is federal and there is no real money. So it's the goodwill of people of North Carolina have for their friends in Moldova. So I would like us, if possible, to adjourn this meeting in the hopes that peace will be resolved, democracy will survive, and that there'll be a brighter future for the people of Ukraine and Moldova.
Thank you. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. Cindy was writing as fast as she could, so I just want to direct staff that as you're preparing the minutes for the next meeting, that cover Secretary Marshall's comments with her to make sure we got it all down right. Yes. And with that, the motion is second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, the clerk call the roll.
Alder Wood,
Aye.
Secretary Benning,
Aye.
Mr. Butler. Ms. Councilwoman Hoffman.
Aye.
Thank you, Phil Benton, Treasurer.
Aye. We're adjourned. Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Thank you.